They left him to rot under the hospital. He came back with a 6-foot sword, a spotted hat, and the ability to rip your heart out while you're still talking shit. Already the scariest motherfucker on the continent. Watch the villages scramble. He just decides you don't get to keep your limbs today. Absolute menace. Beautiful.
There's a room under Konoha that nobody talks about. It sits 3 floors below the hospital, past 2 locked doors and a hallway that smells like bleach and old paper. And the village keeps it for the cases they've already given up on. Cold stone floor, 1 lamp. A drain in the corner because they expect things to need washing away. On the 11th night of a summer that had been too hot for too long, there was a 6-year-old boy lying on that floor. His skin had gone the color of ash. White patches crawled up his forearms and across his throat like frost creeping over a window, hard and flaking at the edges, and where they touched him, the flesh underneath had stopped being flesh and started being something else. On his stomach, half hidden by a hospital gown that was 3 sizes too big, a seal flickered, black ink stuttering like a candle in a draft. Every time it dimmed, the boy's breathing hitched, and every time it caught again, he made a sound that a child shouldn't be able to make. His name was Naruto Uzumaki. He weighed less than a sack of rice. He had been in that room for 6 weeks. 3 doctors had signed off on him. 2 elders had reviewed the file, called it an unfortunate outcome, and moved on to the next item on the agenda before the ink dried. Somewhere in a tower above him, a man in a hat with an old face and older regrets had signed a form that used the phrase palliative containment, which is a long way of saying let him finish. Nobody in that village expected the boy to see autumn. And I want you to hold that picture in your head, the cold, the flickering seal, the drain in the corner, because everything that comes after starts there. Every enemy who ever screamed his name, every Kaji who ever went silent when he walked into a room, every man who ever felt his own heartbeat pumping in someone else's fist, all of it started on that floor, with one idiot who refused to leave. Shisui Uchiha was 21 years old and genuinely one of the strongest shinobi alive, which made it all the more embarrassing that he walked into the doorframe on his first visit. He'd been assigned as an observer. That's the actual word they used on the paperwork. Observer, watch the Jinchuriki, log the seal's degradation, report if the fox shows any sign of leaking out during the collapse. 2 hours a day, in and out. Keep it professional. Shisui lasted about 9 minutes before he sat down on the floor next to the kid and started talking to him like a person. Hey, you awake? The boy's eyes cracked open, blue, cloudy, exhausted. He didn't answer. That's fine, I'll talk, you listen. That's usually how it works with me anyway. Shisui leaned back against the wall and stretched his legs out on the freezing stone like it was a beach. My name's Shisui. I'm a Jonin. That means I'm important, which means when I say the hallway out there is broken, somebody has to actually fix it. Watch this. I'm going to be so annoying about that light. Nothing. Just the breathing. Shisui kept going anyway. He came back the next day, and the next. He brought a paper fan and waved it over the boy for an hour because the room was hot and the fever was worse. He brought soup that Naruto couldn't keep down and ate it himself so the effort wouldn't be wasted. He brought a chipped shogi board and played both sides, badly, narrating each move in 2 different voices, one of which was an old man with a speech impediment. On the 9th day, Shisui tripped over the lamp cord on purpose and went down flat on his face with a crash that brought 2 Anbu into the room with kunai drawn. From the floor of that cell, thin and gray and half dead, came a sound like a cough with a laugh trapped inside it. Shisui stayed face down for a second longer than he needed to, because he was smiling too hard to let anyone see it. Get out, he told the Anbu. We're busy. That was the beginning. By the end of the 2nd week, Naruto was talking. Small things at first, in a voice like a door hinge. Why do you come here? Do you have to? They said I'm the fox. Shisui answered every one of them straight, which is a thing almost nobody had ever done for that boy. You're not the fox, he said. You're the guy holding the door shut. There's a difference, and anybody too stupid to see it is somebody whose opinion doesn't count. Everyone says it. Everyone's an idiot. I say this as someone who is frequently one of them. Shisui flicked a shogi piece across the board. The trick is to be an idiot about the right things. Naruto asked him once if he was going to die. Shisui didn't lie. That's the thing about him that mattered most, in the end. He looked at a 6-year-old with lead-white patches on his neck and a failing seal on his belly, and he said, "Probably, unless somebody does something stupid about it." "Are you going to do something stupid about it?" "Kid," Shisui said, "I've been doing something stupid about it since day one. This is just the first time you noticed." 8 days later, at 2 in the morning, Shisui Uchiha wrapped Naruto Uzumaki in a coat that hung to the boy's ankles, put him on his back, and walked out of Konoha through a section of wall that his Sharingan told him would be unobserved for exactly 40 seconds. He used 31 of them. They were gone for a year. I want to be honest about that year, because the version people tell later makes it sound like an adventure. And parts of it were. Most of it was 2 people freezing in the wrong places. They crossed the Land of Fire's southern border on foot. They rode in the back of a fish cart for 2 days and smelled like it for 6. They slept in a hollow log during a storm in the Land of Rivers. And Shisui spent the entire night with his arms around a shaking child, singing a song about a duck because it was the only song he knew all the words to and he refused to hum. Naruto got worse. That's the part nobody likes to hear. The white patches spread past his collarbone. His hair started coming out in the mornings. There were 3 separate nights where Shisui sat in the black with 2 fingers on the boy's throat, counting a pulse that kept forgetting to happen. And by the 3rd one, Shisui had stopped praying and started just ordering. "No, you don't get to. Not tonight. I said not tonight." Like the universe was a subordinate who could be shouted at. And here's what Shisui did with that year, in between all of it. He made the kid laugh. He walked into every low branch on the continent. He mispronounced the names of towns in ways that made merchants furious. In a village outside Takigakure, he stole a hat off a scarecrow, put it on, and did a 5-minute impression of the 3rd Hokage giving a speech about the importance of vegetables. And Naruto laughed so hard he coughed blood on Shisui's shirt, and Shisui just said, "Worth it," and kept going. He taught him things. How to read a road. How to tell which stranger in a room is armed. How to fall so it doesn't break you. And one night, in a hot spring town where they traded Shisui's spare kunai for a room, the boy, who had spent his whole life being told what he was by people who had never once asked him anything, said something that Shisui carried to the end of his life. "Shisui, if I make it, what do I do?" Shisui was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Anything you want. That's the whole point of making it." "That's a stupid answer. That's a free answer, kid. Those are the best kind." He reached over and pulled the too big coat up over Naruto's shoulder. "Just do me one favor. When you get strong, and you will, I've seen your chakra. It's disgusting. You're going to be a monster. When you get there, don't waste it asking people for permission." Naruto thought about that. "Is that what you do?" "I ask for permission constantly," Shisui said. "It's my great flaw. Learn from my mistakes." That was the last real conversation they had before Uzushio. The ruins of the Uzumaki homeland sit on a broken island off the eastern coast, and the sea around it is bad enough that most captains will refuse the trip for any amount of money. Shisui found a captain who wouldn't refuse. It cost him the Uchiha crest off his back. He cut it free from his shirt and handed it over as collateral, which, when you think about what that fabric meant to a man like him, tells you exactly how far past caring he was. They landed at dawn. Naruto couldn't walk anymore by then. Shisui carried him. The village was bones. Whole streets swallowed by sand and salt grass, spiral emblems worn down to smears, a tower that had fallen sideways across the harbor and been there so long the barnacles had made it part of the coast. Shisui went through it, building by building for 11 days with a boy on his back and a scroll of Uzumaki archive notation he'd stolen out of Konoha's restricted section. And on the 11th day, he found a stairwell under a collapsed floor. Down there, 40 feet under the ruin of what had once been the greatest medical library in the shinobi world, sealed behind 3 layers of Uzumaki fuinjutsu that would have killed anyone who tried to force them, was a stone case. Inside the case was a matrix, not a scroll. A living array, spiraling script laid over an anatomical diagram, ink that still moved slow across the paper after 400 years, and a heart-shaped mark at the center of it that pulsed once every few seconds like something asleep. The notes around it were written by an Uzumaki woman named Nagiko, who had, sometime in a century nobody had bothered to record properly, sailed west and met a man from a place with no shinobi in it. A man who could cut a person into pieces without hurting them. A man who called his power a fruit and his art an operation, and who left behind something of himself before he died. She'd spent 40 years trying to write it into chakra. She'd gotten it done. And then she'd sealed it because the last line of her note said this: "It is a whole soul, and a whole soul needs a whole host. Do not give this to a body that is only half here. It will not save them. It will replace them." Shisui read that line 4 times. Then he looked at the boy on the floor behind him. Gray, patched with white, seal on his stomach going dim, dim, dim. And he said out loud to a dead woman 4 centuries in the ground, "He's more here than anybody I've ever met." And that's when Root came down the stairs, 9 of them. Blank porcelain masks, gray fatigues, tanto already drawn. They didn't announce themselves and they didn't ask questions, because Danzo Shimura had given them one instruction regarding the missing Jinchuriki and the traitor who took him. And it was a short instruction. Shisui put Naruto behind a fallen pillar, stood up, and rolled his shoulders. "Okay," he said. 9. That's rude. 6 would have been rude. 9's just insulting. Then his Sharingan spun up, and the room stopped being a room and started being a place where people died. He took the first 2 before they'd fully cleared the stairs. A body flicker so fast that the sound of it arrived after he'd already stopped moving. One blade through a throat, one elbow through a mask, and the skull behind it. The third caught him across the ribs. He let it happen so he could get inside the man's guard and break his neck with a forearm. Understand something. Shisui Uchiha at full strength was one of the 5 most dangerous people alive. Shisui Uchiha, after a year of forced marches, starvation rations, and sleeping in shifts of 90 minutes, was still enough to make 9 Root operatives regret their mourning. He killed 6 of them in under 2 minutes. The other 3 were the good ones. They flanked. They kept distance. They fought his eyes instead of his hands, and one of them had wind release that opened a line across Shisui's thigh that went to the bone. He kept smiling. He kept moving. He got another one. Pinned him to a pillar with his own tanto, said something cheerful in his face while doing it, and then a blade went through Shisui's back and came out the front of his shoulder, and everything after that was borrowed. He tore free. He put distance between himself and them with a flicker that cost him more than he had, and he ran, bleeding to the pillar where a dying child was lying with his eyes barely open. "Hey," Shisui said. "Hey, Naruto, look at me. Look at me, kid, come on." Naruto looked at him. "I need you to be really, really stubborn for about 30 more seconds. Can you do that?" "I'm tired." "I know." Shisui's hands were shaking. He held the matrix against Naruto's chest and pressed both palms flat over it. "I know. Just 30. You've done worse." He drove it home. The seal went in like a hand going into water. The paper burned away and the script kept going, spiraling out from the boy's sternum, wrapping his ribs down, spilling down both arms in lines of blue-white light that made the whole basement glow. Naruto arched off the floor and screamed, and Shisui held him down and kept his hands there while the Root shinobi came across the room. Then he grabbed the boy under the arms, dumped him into an empty supply crate against the wall, and slammed the lid. He put a silencing genjutsu on it. A good one. The kind that makes the world outside go soft and far away so that a child in a box doesn't have to hear anything. It wasn't perfect. He was dying, and he was in a hurry. Through the cracks in the wood, Naruto heard 3 things. He heard steel, a lot of it fast and then less of it. He heard a Root operative say in a flat voice with no person behind it, "You died for a demon." And then he heard Shisui Uchiha laugh. Not a bitter laugh. Not the sound a man makes at the end. A real one, bright and surprised and genuinely delighted. The same laugh he'd used when he walked into the door frame. The same one he'd used in the fish cart. The same one he'd used every single night for a year in a row for the benefit of an audience of 1. And he said, still laughing, "You've got it backwards, buddy." Then the sound stopped. Here's the part I need you to sit in with me for a second, because everything about the man Naruto Uzumaki became lives inside these 40 seconds. Inside the crate, the boy stopped screaming. The silencing genjutsu held. The world outside went soft. And what filled that box wasn't sound at all. It was the absence of it. The specific weight of a laugh that had been there and then wasn't, pressing in on a 6-year-old from every side. He'd been alone before. He'd been alone his whole life, actually. But that had been the kind of alone where nobody had shown up yet. This was the other kind. His hands found the lid. He pushed. It didn't move because there was a body against it. And somewhere in the space between the boy's own grief and the fuinjutsu blazing through his ribs, something that had been asleep for 400 years opened its eyes. I've heard people describe it 100 ways. Here's the way that's true. Naruto Uzumaki, 6 years old, dying, alone in a wooden box in the dirt under a dead village, was hit by an entire other life at full speed. He got a childhood in a white city with a father who was a doctor and a mother who laughed at everything. He got the sound of amber lid crystallizing under his own skin, the exact same white patches, the exact same sickness, 4 centuries and an ocean away, a disease with a different name and identical mathematics. And he understood with a clarity that should have broken him that the thing killing him had killed this man too. He got a sister named Lami. He got a burning hospital. He got a country wiped off a map by people who were afraid of it. He got Corazon. He got a big clumsy man in a feather coat who fell over furniture and set himself on fire with his own lighter and couldn't say a word out loud, who stole a sick boy out of a bad life and carried him across a continent trying to find something that would save him, and who died in the snow so that boy could live. He got the sound of a gunshot through a soundproof cage and a 6-year-old in a crate under Uzushio, listening to a silence where a laugh used to be, understood that he was reliving a story that had already happened once, 2 lives snapped together like a bone going back into its socket. The Ope Ope matrix drank the Nine-Tails chakra and turned it into fuel, and the fuel burned out the lead in his blood, and the white patches lifted off his skin like ash coming off a fire, and somewhere behind his eyes, in an ankle-deep flood in a sewer that had been in his head all along, a mountain of red fur opened one eye and looked down at a boy who had walked in without being dragged. "You," the Nine-Tails said, "smell wrong." The boy looked up at a creature the size of a mountain range. "You're loud," he said. The fox blinked. "You are not afraid of me." "I've been dying for 2 years," the boy said. "You're not even in the top 3. And the Nine-Tails, who had spent 100 years being screamed at, begged at, prayed at, and used, laughed so hard the water in the sewer rippled. "Take it then," it said. "Take the chakra. Let's see what a dead man does with it." The crate lid came off with a sound like a bone breaking. The boy who climbed out was still 6 years old. That's the part people forget when they tell this story. Still small, still skinny, still wearing a coat that hung past his ankles. But his skin was clean. His eyes had gone a pale silver blue, cold as a knife left outside overnight. On the back of his fingers, 4 letters had come up in fresh black ink, like the tattoo had been under his skin since birth, waiting for a reason. D-E-A-T-H. A spotted fur hat sat on his head. Nobody has ever been able to explain where it came from. He never explained it either. Ask him and he'd look at you like you'd asked where his hands came from. He walked past the pillar and he didn't look down at what was lying there, because he already knew, and because looking would have finished something inside him that he needed to stay unfinished for a few more minutes. He picked up a nodachi off the floor. It belonged to the root captain, and it was ridiculous. A blade nearly 6 feet in the sheath, black lacquer, red cord wrap, far too much sword for a full-grown man, and an outright joke in the hands of a child. He picked it up like it weighed nothing. Later, he'd call it kikoku. He never said why. 6 root operatives had come down the second stairwell as reinforcement. They stood in a loose half circle across the basement, blades out, staring at a small boy in a fur hat holding a sword taller than he was, and for the first time in the careers of every single one of them, none of them moved first. The boy raised one hand, palm out. Room. I've heard 100 people try to describe the sound The closest anyone's gotten is this. It's the noise a storm makes right before it breaks, when the pressure drops out of the air and every animal within a mile stops eating at the same time. A low, rolling hum felt in the teeth before it's heard in the ears. A blue hemisphere bled out from his palm. It didn't shoot. It didn't explode. It expanded, translucent and endless, rolling out through the basement and up through the collapsed floor above and out past the ruined walls of the archive, swallowing stone and sand and salt, air, and 6 trained killers in the space of one breath. Every one of those men felt it close over them. I want to be clear about what that feels like, because it happens again and again in this story, and I need you to understand it every time. Being inside another person's room isn't like being in a barrier. A barrier is a wall. You can see it, you can hit it, you can plan around it. A room is worse. A room is the sudden, absolute knowledge that the space you are standing in has stopped belonging to you. Your feet are on his floor. Your breath is in his air. The distance between you and him is a number he gets to choose. The root operatives have been trained out of fear. Danzo carved it out of them as children. Every single one of them felt their instincts scream anyway. They attacked. Of course they did. That's what they were built to do. The boy didn't take a step. He turned Kikoku in his grip and swung it in one flat horizontal arc, low and easy, the way you'd sweep a stick through tall grass. Amputate. The blade didn't touch a single one of them. The men came apart anyway. 6 bodies separated along clean planes, arms from shoulders, torsos from hips, legs from knees, and hung in the air for half a second before gravity remembered them. They hit the stone floor in 30-odd pieces, and the pieces rolled, and every piece was alive. That's the horror of it. That's what nobody's ever ready for. There was no blood. There was no wound. There was no pain at all. A root captain's head lay on its side on the basement floor, 16 feet from his own hands, and looked out across a scattered arrangement of his own limbs, and felt absolutely nothing, and understood with total clarity that he was awake and whole and in perfect health, and would never move again, unless the child in the fur hat decided otherwise. He made a sound. It wasn't a word. The boy walked between them. He stopped once, at the pillar, and he crouched down and picked up a coat off the floor, and he put it around his shoulders even though it dragged in the dirt behind him. Then he went up the stairs and out into the ruin, into a cold gray morning off the eastern sea. He didn't look back. He'd learned later from a book that the man whose life was now stapled to his own had once said something about that. About how a person can only carry so many things at once, and how looking back is a luxury you buy with a safety you haven't earned yet. He'd carry Shisui's coat for the next 10 years. He'd never once turn around. Konoha got him back 2 years later, and the village was not ready. Picture the front gate on an ordinary autumn morning. Kotetsu and Izumo at the check-in desk arguing about a lunch order. Merchants going in, Jainin coming out. A totally normal day in the strongest hidden village in the world, and then a kid walks up the road, 8 years old, maybe, hard to tell. Yellow hair under a white fur hat with black spots, a coat too big for him, worn to threads at the hem, black ink on his fingers, and a nodachi across his back in a sheath so long the tip nearly scraped the dirt. Kotetsu stood up. Kid, this is a shinobi checkpoint. Where are your parents? The boy stopped at the desk. He looked at Kotetsu with a pair of eyes that had absolutely nothing behind them that a grown man wanted to see in a child. Naruto Uzumaki, he said. Tell the Hokage I'm back. He'll want to handle this himself. Izumo dropped his pen. The meeting in the Hokage's office lasted 11 minutes, and I'd pay real money to have watched it. Hiruzen Sarutobi had aged 5 years in the 2 he'd spent believing this boy was dead. He came around the desk fast, and he got about 3 steps before Naruto held up one hand, and something in the way he did it stopped a Hokage cold. Sit down, old man. Hiruzen sat down. 4 Anbu were in that room. 2 on the ceiling, 2 behind the pillars. All 4 of them shifted. You look, Hiruzen started. Healthy, Naruto said. I know. You'll want to know how. So will your council and your medical division and the 2 elders who signed my death paperwork before I was actually dead. In fact, you're going to be asked to hand me to a research team. You should know now that whoever they send won't come back in one piece, and I'd rather you hear that from me than find out. Hiruzen's pipe stopped halfway to his mouth. Naruto, Shisui Uchiha took me out of that cell because you weren't going to. Nothing in the boy's voice moved when he said it. That was the terrible part. I'm not here to argue about whether that was right. I'm telling you what happened so you don't have to guess. He found a cure. He used it. He died for it. Who killed him? 9 root operatives in the ruins of Uzushio, Naruto said. You know who sent them. I know you know. And we're both going to pretend you're going to do something about it, because that's how this village works, and I've decided I can live with that for a while. The room got very still. Hiruzen set the pipe down. You've grown up. I've been busy. And the seal? Stable. Better than stable. The thing they put in me eats the fox's chakra as fuel and gives it back as something else. Naruto tilted his head slightly. Do you want the lecture or the demonstration? Hiruzen, who had been Hokage for a very long time, said, the demonstration. Naruto raised one hand. Room. The hum rolled through the tower. Every Anbu in that office felt the floor stop belonging to them. The blue hemisphere expanded out from the boy's palm and swallowed the desk, the windows, the pillars, the ceiling, the 4 hidden operatives, and the man in the hat. Shambles. The Anbu vanished, all 3 of the ones with visible positions, gone from the ceiling, gone from behind the pillars, and reappeared sitting neatly in 3 chairs along the wall, in each other's spots, weapons in each other's hands, in perfect silence. One of them had another one's mask on. Nobody had touched anybody. Nobody had seen anything move. The 4th Anbu, the one who'd been hiding well enough that Naruto had left him alone, drew a blade and then thought better of it, because the kid's eyes hadn't moved off the Hokage the entire time. Hiruzen exhaled slowly. Do you want to stay? I want to be in the academy, Naruto said. I want a headband. I want to be inside the system instead of a problem outside it, because inside the system, people need paperwork before they come for me. That's all I want from you. And in exchange, I'll fight for the village. A pause. I'll fight for the village, old man, not for the council. Learn the difference now and we'll save ourselves a conversation later. Hiruzen looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he laughed, a tired, cracked laugh with something like grief in it. Shisui, he said, would have liked you very much. For the first time in that entire meeting, something crossed Naruto's face. It was gone in a second. He did, Naruto said, and walked out. The academy did not know what to do with him. Here's a fun fact. Naruto Uzumaki never once completed a written test in the academy. He'd sit down, read the entire thing, write the answers to the questions that interested him, and then put his head down on his arms under the fur hat and sleep until the bell. Iruka Umino, who was a good man and a decent teacher and completely out of his depth, tried to discipline him about it exactly once. Uzumaki, explain to me why half this test is blank. Question 14 asks the ideal ratio of shinobi to civilians in a village evacuation, Naruto said without lifting his head. The answer in your book is 1 to 20. That's a number somebody made up in an office. The real answer is that it depends on the terrain, the threat, and whether the shinobi in question are willing to leave people behind. Your book doesn't have a space for that, so I didn't fill it in. Iruka stood there with the test in his hand. That's a good point, he said. You still have to fill it in. No, Iruka gave up. He also, quietly, started writing better questions. The other kids handled it about how you'd expect. Some of them were scared. Some of them decided he was a poser because he was 8 and he carried a sword the size of a fence post. And posers are a thing. There was an incident in the sparring yard involving a boy from a mid-tier clan who took a swing at the fur hat, and Naruto put him on the ground so fast that Iruka only saw the aftermath. And the boy spent the rest of the afternoon insisting he had no idea what happened because he genuinely didn't. 2 people got past the wall though, and neither of them tried. The first one was Shikamaru Nara. Shikamaru took one look at the new kid on his first day, took in the tattoos and the sword in the eyes, and said, "Troublesome," in exactly the tone of a man noting weather. Then he sat down next to him at lunch. He did that every single day for 4 years. He never asked permission. He never explained himself. He'd just show up, drop onto the bench, unwrap whatever his mother had packed and complain about it. And Naruto would sit there eating and saying nothing, and about twice a week he'd say something so cutting about a teacher or a classmate, or the shape of Shikamaru's lunch, that Shikamaru would laugh out loud in the middle of the yard. The second one was Choji Akimichi, who on day one held out a bag of chips to the terrifying tattooed kid nobody would sit near and said, "You want some? They're the barbecue ones, they're better." Naruto looked at the bag for 2 full seconds, then he took one. "They are better," he said. Choji Akimichi has told that story at every gathering he has attended for the rest of his life, and he tells it exactly the same way every time. Understand, Naruto did not become warm. He never became warm. He didn't hug anybody, he didn't say friend, he didn't do birthdays. What he did was this. When Shikamaru got stuck on a tactics problem, Naruto would drop the answer into the conversation sideways, like he was talking about something else, and let Shikamaru arrive at it himself and take the credit. When 3 older kids started in on Choji's weight in the corridor, Naruto walked past, stopped, and looked at them. Only that. He looked at them. 2 of them apologized. The third one moved to a different academy class the following month and told people his family relocated. And there was one afternoon, Choji sitting on the steps, red-faced, doing the thing where you pretend you're fine, when Naruto sat down next to him without being asked and said, "You're the only person in our year who's been hit hard enough to know what it feels like and still doesn't want to hit anyone. That's rarer than talent. Don't let a clown with a big mouth convince you it's a weakness." Choji looked up. Naruto was already opening a bag of chips he'd bought on the way, barbecue ones. "Also, they're wrong about the flavor," he said. "Salt is for cowards." That's Naruto Uzumaki's version of a hug. Take it or leave it. Graduation day, team assignments, Iruka reading names off a clipboard in a room full of 12-year-olds with brand new headbands. They shook up the old formations that year, and there were reasons for it. The Nara clan pushed hard for a specific configuration and got it, and the Hokage went along because he'd had a report on his desk for 4 years about what happened when you put Naruto Uzumaki next to somebody who came 7. Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, Ino Yamanaka, Sensei Kakashi Hatake. Ino and Sakura made eye contact across the room. There was a war in it. Sasuke stared at the wall like the wall had killed his family. Team 8, Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame, Kurenai Yuhi. Team 10, Shikamaru Nara, Choji Akimichi, Naruto Uzumaki. Shikamaru put his head down on the desk. "Troublesome," he said into the wood. "We're going to be the most annoying team in this village." Choji, chewing. "Is that bad?" "It's exhausting." Naruto, from under the hat, without opening his eyes. "You've been trying to get on this team since we were 9, Shikamaru-ya. You went to your father about it in the spring. Don't be modest, it doesn't suit you." Shikamaru's head came up off the desk very slowly. "How do you know that?" "Your father's a terrible liar, and I asked him about it in a corridor." "You asked my father?" Choji had to leave the room. Asuma Sarutobi arrived 20 minutes late with a cigarette in his mouth and the general air of a man who had drawn a short straw and was going to make everyone watch him deal with it. He looked at the 3 of them on the training field. Nara kid, half asleep. Akimichi kid, eating. And a 12-year-old in a spotted fur hat with a 6-foot nodachi across his back and a set of eyes that made Asuma's jaw tighten before he'd even said hello. He'd read the file. Everybody had read the file. Asuma had made a decision, coming in, that he was going to treat this kid like a genin, because the fastest way to ruin a talented brat is to let him think the rules bend for him. I want you to understand that this was a reasonable decision made by an experienced jonin with good intentions. "All right," Asuma said. "Baseline test. 20 laps around the field. Go." Shikamaru groaned and started walking. Choji stuffed the bag in his pocket and started jogging. Naruto leaned back against a tree, crossed his arms, and pulled the brim of the fur hat down over his eyes. Asuma waited. Uzumaki. "I heard you. Then move." "I don't like being ordered around," Naruto said. "If you want me to move, make it worth my time." Shikamaru stopped jogging. Choji stopped jogging. Both of them turned around in unison with the specific instinct that tells a person a fight is about to happen and they should be facing it. Asuma took the cigarette out of his mouth. Here's the thing about Asuma Sarutobi. He wasn't a hothead. He was a Guardian 12 veteran, a wine-natured close-quarter specialist, a man who'd fought at the fire daimyo's side against people who did this professionally. He didn't get angry. He got instructive. "Fine," he said. "Let's make it worth your time." He flicked the cigarette away, brought out both trench knives and pushed wind chakra through them until the blades extended 6 inches past the steel with a hiss. Then he came in fast, not full speed, but fast enough to teach a lesson, closing 8 meters in a blink with a low sweep aimed at putting the kid on his back in the dirt. Naruto didn't move off the tree. Room. The hum rolled out across the training field. Birds came off the trees in every direction at once, 100 of them, all at the same instant, and the leaves on the ground moved in a way that wind doesn't move leaves. The blue hemisphere swallowed the entire field. Asuma felt it go over him mid-stride, and his whole body screamed at him to stop. And he was a professional, so he didn't stop, and I think about that a lot. He committed. He drove the sweep home into the space where Naruto's legs were. Naruto raised 2 fingers. Shambles. Asuma's world went sideways. One instant he was mid-attack in an open field. The next he was standing 11 meters away, inside a hanging cloud of his own cigarette smoke, choking on it, blind, with his knives cutting nothing at all. The transition had no travel. There was no sensation of movement. His inner ear filed a formal complaint. He got 2 steps clear of the smoke, spun to find the target, and stopped. Because Kikoku's flat was resting against the side of his throat, Naruto stood behind him. He'd taken 3 steps in the entire fight. The sword, a blade that by rights a 12-year-old should have needed both hands and a running start to lift, was held out one-handed, level, without a tremor. "Checkmate, sensei." Nobody said anything for 5 full seconds. Then Asuma let out a long breath through his nose, and he did something that put him permanently in the good column in my book. He laughed. "Well," he said, "that's the worst first day I've ever had." He stepped back. Naruto lowered the sword and rested it on his shoulder. Over on the grass, Shikamaru Nara was sitting cross-legged on a rock with his chin in his hand and an expression on his face that his mother would have recognized instantly and been alarmed by. It was the look of a boy who had just found something genuinely interesting for the first time in his entire life. Choji had inhaled a chip and was in real trouble about it. Asuma did something over the next few weeks that a lesser man wouldn't have. He changed. He stopped trying to train Naruto and started trying to use him, which sounds cold, but it was the only relationship the kid would accept, and Asuma read that fast. He'd lay out a mission scenario, and instead of asking Naruto to solve it the Genin way, he'd ask, "How do you break this?" And Naruto would tell him, in 3 sentences. And they'd be 3 sentences that made a Guardian 12 veteran go quiet and rethink his own approach. The 3 of them ran D ranks for 2 months, which is a comedy in itself. There is a mission report on file in Konoha's archive concerning the retrieval of the fire daimyo's wife's cat, and that report contains the phrase, "The animal was recovered instantaneously by means of spatial displacement," and the client was extremely upset about it. What actually happened? Naruto expanded a room across 4 blocks of the daimyo's estate, said "shambles," and swapped the cat with a decorative gourd from a hallway table. The cat arrived in Choji's arms. The gourd arrived in a tree. The daimyo's wife, who had been informed the retrieval would take a day, screamed, Shikamaru's official comment on the record, "He does that." But the important part of those 2 months wasn't the D ranks. It was Shikamaru, because Shikamaru started building around him. He'd sit in the grass with a stick and draw formations in the dirt, and they were formations no Genin should have been thinking about, because they all assumed one absurd variable, that at any moment, any 2 objects on the field could swap places with no warning. Once you accept that as a rule, strategy stops being about position and starts being about setup. You stop asking where the enemy is. You start asking where the enemy would be most ruined to suddenly find himself. Asuma watched him do it and got a cold feeling in his stomach. And that feeling was, these 2 are going to be a problem for somebody. He was right. He just didn't know how soon. The mission came down in the middle of winter, and it came from the Hokage's desk directly, which is never a good sign for a Genin team. A group of Kiri defectors had gone over the border into the land of frost, carrying stolen military scrolls. High-end water and lightning techniques, the kind that turn a small village into a regional threat overnight. They were headed for a buyer. Konoha wanted the scrolls to stop moving. Asuma read the file, got to the third page, and said a word he didn't usually say in front of children. Problem? Shikamaru asked. They know who's leading them. Asuma tossed the page on the table. Ameyuri Ringo. Choji didn't recognize the name. Shikamaru did from a bingo book he'd read out of boredom, and he sat up straight. One of the 7 swordsmen, he said. The lightning one. She's got... Kiba, Asuma said. Twin blades. They generate and channel lightning at a level that shouldn't be possible from a handheld weapon. She can turn a battlefield into a grounded circuit and stand in the middle of it. He rubbed his face. This is an A rank. We're getting it because we're the closest team and the border's about to close for the season. Naruto had been standing by the window the entire time with his back to the room. Good, he said. Asuma looked at him. Good? You've been asking me how I'd break things for 2 months, Senseiya. Naruto turned around. Let's break something. The gorge in the Land of Frost is a mile-long cut through white rock, floored with a frozen river, walled on both sides with glacier ice 100 feet thick and old enough to be blue. The ambush hit them 9 minutes after they entered it, which meant Ameyuri had been watching the pass for at least a day. The first thing that happened was the sky lit up, not a bolt. A storm, the entire upper length of the gorge going white at once. Arcs jumping between the ice walls, the air turning to a taste like copper and burning hair. It hit the frozen river and spread across it in a web, and the whole surface of the ice became a live grid. Choji got thrown 20 feet into a snowbank. Shikamaru went flat behind an ice formation and stayed there because the alternative was becoming a conductor. Asuma was already gone. 6 Kiri defectors had come down the far end of the gorge, and he'd met them halfway, trench knives out, wind against water at the mouth of the pass. That left the middle of the gorge. And in the middle of the gorge, walking out into the open with lightning falling around him and his hat getting shoved sideways by the wind, was a 12-year-old with a sword on his shoulder. Naruto, Shikamaru shouted. Get down, she's... Ameyuri Ringo landed in front of him. She was tall, red-haired, sharp-toothed, and grinning the way people grin when they're already counting the money. Both kiba were in her hands and the blades were shrieking. That awful serrated sound they make when the current's running hot, sparks pouring off the teeth and hissing into the snow. She looked the kid up and down. The hat, the tattoos, the absurd sword. They sent children, she said. Konoha's really scraping it, huh? Tell you what, brat. Put the toy down and I'll only take one arm. Naruto looked up at her. Room. The hum came out of him like a pressure front. I've told you what this feels like from the inside, but I want to describe what it looked like from Shikamaru Nara's position behind that ice formation, because he's the one who put it in the report. The blue hemisphere punched out from Naruto's body and kept going. It swallowed the frozen river. It swallowed the ice walls on both sides. It rose past the top of the gorge and closed over the whole mile-long cut like a lid coming down on a pot. A translucent blue dome the size of a small mountain, humming at a frequency that made the snow on the ledges jump. Ameyuri Ringo's grin went sideways. Her lightning, the storm she was generating, the arc still crawling across the ice, was inside it. She was inside it. Something in her body understood before her brain caught up. Some old animal instinct that had kept her alive through 3 wars, and it told her in plain language, you are standing in someone else's house. Talked. Naruto lifted one finger. The ice wall on the eastern side of the gorge tore itself apart. 50 tons of glacial ice, a slab twice the size of a house, ripped free of the cliff with a crack that rolled down the mile of the pass like artillery, and it rose. It went up into the air over the gorge, turning slowly, throwing blue shadows across the snow, held up by nothing but a 12-year-old's index finger. Choji Akimichi from the snowbank said a bad word. Naruto pointed. The block fell. And here's where I want to give Ameyuri Ringo her due, because she was one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist, and she'd earned it. Most people wouldn't have died right there. She didn't run. She jumped into it, crossed both kiba over her head, dumped every volt she had into the blades, and cut 50 tons of glacier in half on the way down. The two halves went past her and hit the frozen river hard enough to break it. And steam and ice dust went up in a wall 30 feet high, and she came out of that cloud at full sprint with her teeth bared and both blades screaming. Die, brat! Naruto lowered Kikoku off his shoulder. His face didn't move at all. The weak don't get to decide how they die. She was 4 feet from him. Shambles. Both Kiba vanished out of her hands. They reappeared 10 meters behind her, stuck point down in the snow, still crackling, still throwing sparks into the drift. Eiichiro Ringo's charge continued for another half second on pure momentum with absolutely nothing in her fists, and she went straight past him, and the look on her face in that half second is the thing Shikamaru said he'd remember when he was old. Not fear, confusion. The complete, total confusion of a professional whose entire life had been built on the weight of 2 specific objects. Discovering that weight was gone, she skidded, threw up a spray of snow, and spun around. Kikoku was already drawn. The slash was horizontal, and it covered the distance between them before she could get her hands up, and the blade never touched her. Amputate. Eiichiro Ringo came apart into 5 sections in the snow. She lay there in pieces on the ice, head and shoulders here, arm there, torso, hips, legs, and she was alive, fully alive. Her eyes were open and moving, tracking the gray sky above the gorge. Her mouth was working. Her lightning cut off in an instant because there was nothing left to channel it through, and the storm above the pass died like someone had thrown a switch. She felt no pain. That's the thing. She was in 5 pieces on a frozen river, and she felt absolutely fine, and she was going to keep feeling fine forever, that until somebody decided otherwise. At the far end of the gorge, Asuma Sarutobi put down the last of the 6 defectors and turned around just in time to see the dome fade off the sky, and a 12-year-old sheathing a sword over a scattered arrangement of one of the most feared swordsmen alive. He didn't say anything. He couldn't, for a bit. Shikamaru came out from behind the ice formation. He walked over, slow, hands in his pockets, breath fogging, and he stood next to Naruto and looked down at Eiichiro Ringo's head, which looked back up at him with an expression that had gone somewhere past terror into a place with no name. Huh, Shikamaru said. Say it. How long before she can move? A few hours, Naruto said, if I feel like putting her back together. Shikamaru turned that over. You could actually watch him do it. And if you don't, then she stays like that until somebody who feels like it comes along. Shikamaru looked at the pieces for another second. Then he turned around and walked over to Choji, who was standing in the snowbank eating chips at 11 in the morning in the land of frost with the fixed stare of a man who had chosen a coping mechanism and was going to stick with it. You okay? I'm not looking at her, Choji said. That's fair. Shikamaru, I'm not looking at her. I heard you, buddy. They put her back together for the record. Naruto did it in about 90 seconds after Asuma asked him to, and then the 4 of them tied her up with enough sealing wire to hold a biju and hauled her and the scrolls back over the border. The mission report is a legendary document in Konoha's archive. Asuma wrote 4 drafts. The first one described events accurately, and he burned it because he read it back and it sounded like a lie. The second one used the word dismembered, which he crossed out because she wasn't. She was fine. She was walking around in a cell in TNI within the week with no scars, and she'd tell anyone who came near her, in a voice that had gone strange, that she'd been in 5 pieces in the snow and hadn't felt a thing. The third draft he abandoned halfway through. The fourth draft is the one on file, and the keyline reads, Jainin Uzumaki neutralized the primary target without inflicting injury. Recommend the technique be classified. Recommend further that the classification be above my clearance so I never have to explain it again. Hiruzen Sarutobi read that line and laughed until he coughed. That night in the camp on the way home, Asuma sat by the fire with Naruto and offered him a cigarette, which is the closest thing to a promotion a man like Asuma had to give. Naruto looked at it. I'm 12. Yeah, Asuma said. Yeah, you are. I keep forgetting that. I'd like it on the record that it's your fault. He put the pack away. Can I ask you something? You'll ask anyway. When you took her apart, Asuma looked into the fire. You could have just killed her. It would have been faster. She was carrying scrolls we needed and a buyer's name we wanted. Naruto pulled the hat down. Dead people are bad at giving directions. That's not the whole answer. Naruto was silent long enough that Asuma thought he'd hit a wall. Then, when somebody dies, it's over for them. That's the part people get wrong about killing. They think it's the worst thing you can do. He watched the fire. The worst thing you can do is take a person who's built their whole life on being unstoppable and show them from the inside that they never were. Eiichiro Ringo is going to be alive for another 40 years. Every one of them, she's going to remember lying in the snow in pieces and feeling fine. Asuma didn't respond right away. That's cold, kid. She hit a 12-year-old with a lightning storm before she said hello, Naruto said. I'm being generous. And Asuma Sarutobi, who'd spent 2 months learning how to be this boy's teacher and had just realized he was going to spend the next several years learning how to be his colleague, put his head back and laughed at the sky. The Chunin exams came in the spring, and by then, the whispers had gotten out of the village and started traveling. They called him the Surgeon of Konoha. Foreign genin heard the name in border towns from merchants who heard it from Kiri traders, who heard it from someone who'd been in the land of frost. The story mutated the way stories do. In one version, he'd cut a swordsman of the mist into pieces and stitched her back together as a puppet. In another version, he was 30 years old and using a transformation to hide it. In a third version, he wasn't a person at all, and Konoha had built him. Most of the genin who showed up at the exams that year had decided it was all noise. You have to understand, genin are 12. 12-year-olds are the single most confident demographic in the shinobi world. They have never lost anything that mattered. When a 12-year-old hears that another 12-year-old is a monster, his first reaction is to be personally offended. The written exam was a comedy. Ibiki Morino put a room full of children under pressure with a rigged test and a psychological trap, and it worked beautifully on everyone except one kid in a fur hat who read the whole thing, understood the game in about 40 seconds, and then wrote, "You're going to tell us the 10th question is a trap, and then say it wasn't. Take the point off if you want." In the answer box for question 10, and put his head down. Ibiki read it during collection, went absolutely still, and then looked up across the room at a sleeping boy with a nodachi propped against his desk. He didn't take the point off. The Forest of Death is a 44 square kilometer training ground full of things designed to eat you. And Team 10 went in with a heaven scroll and a plan that Shikamaru had written on the back of a receipt. They lasted 9 minutes before the plan stopped mattering, because on the far side of the world, in a hideout carved under a mountain, a man with yellow eyes had gotten curious. Orochimaru had a full agenda that year. His agenda involved an Uchiha and a village, and a fair amount of screaming. But he'd also read a report from a spy in the Land of Frost about a Konoha genin who had disassembled Eiichiro Ringo in under a minute, using a technique that had no name in any registry he owned. And Orochimaru, more than anything else on Earth, hated the existence of a technique he didn't own. So before the Uchiha, before the invasion, before any of it, he sent something into that forest to find out whether the rumor was real. He sent Kimimaro. He came out of the trees in front of them at midday, and he didn't hurry about it, pale as paper. White hair, red marks over his eyebrows, a body that moved like it had never once been unsure of itself. He stopped 10 meters away and looked at 3 genin with an expression that had nothing in it. No hostility, no interest, nothing that acknowledged the possibility that the people in front of him could affect his life. Choji got in front of Shikamaru. Good instinct. Bad matchup. "Which of you is the surgeon?" Kimimaro said. Naruto stepped past Choji. Kimimaro looked at him for a moment. Then he raised one fist and pushed. 5 spurs of white bone came out of his knuckles with a wet crack, growing to a foot in length, sharpened to needles. "Lord Orochimaru wishes to know whether you are a threat," he said. "I am here to determine that. Understand before we begin. My bones are absolute. You cannot cut me." Naruto rested Kikoku on his shoulder. He looked at Kimimaro the way a man looks at a puzzle box on a shelf in a shop. Mild interest, no urgency, already bored of the price tag. "You think your calcium matters in my operating room?" Kimimaro's expression flickered. 1 degree, just one, then he came in. "Dance of the Larch." If you've never seen it, here's what it is. Kimimaro pushes bone out of every point on his body simultaneously and then moves through people. Arms, shoulders, spine, ribs, thighs, a whole human being turned into a mass of white spikes traveling at full speed. There is no direction to block from. There is no gap. He'd used it to kill 3 Jonin, and he'd used it without breathing hard. He crossed 10 meters in under half a second, and every bone on his body was already through the space where a 12-year-old had been standing. Room. The hum tore out through the forest. Birds. Thousands of them, off the canopy at once. A sound like an ocean. The blue dome expanded through the trees, through the ferns, up past the canopy and down into the roots, and the entire clearing and everything in it belonged to the boy in the fur hat. Kimimaro's bone dance was inside it. Naruto did not try to block. He did not try to match speed. Both of those were the sucker's game, and he'd known it from the second the bones came out. Bone is a physical shell, and a physical shell is only a problem if you agree to interact with it. 2 spears came at his chest. Shambles. He was past them. No movement. One instant on this side of the assault, the next instant on the other side of it. Standing inside Kimimaro's guard with the entire dance behind him and nothing at all in front, he brought Kikoku up and set the tip against Kimimaro's sternum. Flat and level, like a man lining up a shot. Injection shot. Concentrated spatial energy fired down the length of the blade and went through. Understand what that means. It didn't punch a hole. It didn't chip the bone. It passed through the armored shell of the strongest body in the sound village, the way light passes through glass, with total indifference. And it detonated on the other side of it, against everything soft that a body keeps behind its walls. Kimimaro stopped. The dance ended so abruptly that 2 of his bone spurs snapped off from the momentum and clattered into the dirt. He stood there. He blinked. Then he coughed, and it came up red, and it kept coming. His knees stopped agreeing with him. He went down on one, and then a hand, and he looked at his own chest, where there was no wound, no hole, no mark, nothing at all. And his face did something it had never done in front of another living person. He looked lost. Every enemy Kimimaro had ever faced had tried to get through his bones. His whole life, his whole identity, the one gift the Kaguya blood had given him, was that the outside of him couldn't be beaten. He'd built a religion out of it, and a genin had simply skipped the outside. The disease that was already killing him, the one Orochimaru's medics had failed to slow, the one that had been eating his lungs for a year, flared up in the wreckage of the internal damage like fire finding a dry room. He coughed again, and this time it took him all the way to the ground. Naruto raised a hand. Shambles! Shikamaru and Choji vanished from the clearing edge and reappeared 40 meters back in the tree line, both of them stumbling, Choji flailing at nothing. Naruto sheathed Kikoku with a click. Kimimaro, on his hands and knees, got out one sentence through the blood. Why not finish it? Because you're already finished, Naruto said. You've been dying for a year. Everyone around you knew, and they sent you here anyway to find out if a rumor was true. That's what he thinks you're worth. He turned. Go home and think about that. It'll do more than I could. He walked into the trees. Behind him, Kimimaro Kaguya knelt in the dirt of the Forest of Death and thought about it. Team 10 got their Earth Scroll 2 hours later from an AM team that made the mistake of thinking 3 Konoha genin sitting around a fire were an opportunity. That encounter lasted 11 seconds. Room. Shambles. 3 genin from the hidden range suddenly found themselves 30 feet up in the canopy, in the spots previously occupied by 3 large branches, and the 3 large branches found themselves on the ground next to a fire. Shikamaru took the scroll off the leader's belt during the descent, which he'd planned, because at that point he'd already started planning around the swap as a certainty. A Kusa team tried on day 2. That one took 9 seconds. Choji, watching the second one, said, "Is this what it's going to be like from now on?" Shikamaru chewed a ration bar. Yep. Forever? Until somebody stronger shows up. Choji thought about it. Who's stronger? Shikamaru didn't answer because he'd been trying to work out an answer to that for a year and hadn't gotten anywhere he liked. 21 genin made it through the forest. 21 is too many for the finals, so they ran preliminaries in a stone arena under the tower. with the Jonin sensei in a gallery above, and the Hokage in a chair at the front, and a proctor who couldn't stop coughing. Match 6 on the board. Naruto Uzumaki versus Kankuro of the Sand. Kankuro walked out onto that floor with Crow already off his back, and the swagger of a boy who had never in his life met a problem he couldn't solve with a puppet and some poison. Purple face paint, black hood, grin. He'd heard the rumors. He'd decided the rumors were Konoha propaganda. "Man," he said, looking Naruto over. "The hat? Really? The hat?" Naruto said nothing. "I'm gonna break your limbs, pretty boy. All of them. Then I'm gonna take that hat." Naruto's expression did not change. It never changed. That's the thing that got under people's skin more than anything he ever said. He'd stand there and let you talk, and while you talked, his face would tell you plainly that you were furniture. The proctor raised a hand. "Begin." Kankuro's fingers were already moving. Crow launched off the floor before the word finished. Wire strings singing, all 4 arms deployed, poisoned blades snapping out of the forearms. A puppet master's opening is designed to end a fight in the first 3 seconds against opponents who don't know what they're looking at, and Kankuro was genuinely good at it. Room. The hum rolled through the arena. And here's what makes this scene one of the most repeated stories to come out of that exam. Everyone felt it. Not just the fighters. Every genin in the balconies, every jonin in the gallery, the proctor, the Hokage. A blue dome came up through the floor and swallowed the entire arena. The walls, the statue, the balconies, all of it. And 140 people in that room felt the air pressure change at the same instant and had no framework at all to explain why the hair on their arms was standing up. Ino Yamanaka grabbed Sakura's wrist without meaning to. Kiba's dog started growling at nothing. Gaara of the Sand, who had been leaning against the back wall of the balcony with his eyes half shut for 5 matches, opened them all the way. Shambles. Crow vanished mid-strike. It reappeared in the upper balcony, 12 feet above the arena floor, directly on top of Rock Lee. Now, Rock Lee was, at that time, having a wonderful day. He'd been cheering for everyone. He'd cheered for both fighters. He had his fist in the air. A 4-armed poison combat puppet fell out of nothing onto his head from a height of 6 feet and put him flat on the balcony floor. And Rock Lee let out a sound that was approximately half scream and half apology. "Tblah! I am sorry!" Mike Guy caught the puppet's arm before the blade reached anybody. Tenten screamed. Neji Hyuga had the Byakugan on inside a second and was staring at the arena floor with an expression of naked disbelief, because he'd watched it happen with 360-degree vision at maximum range, and he could report with total certainty that the puppet had gone from there to here without occupying any of the space in between. That's the thing about the Byakugan. It doesn't let you comfort yourself with the idea that you missed something. On the arena floor, Kankuro spun to look up at the balcony with his mouth open. He turned back. Naruto was in front of him. 3 steps. That's all it had taken. 3 steps closed in the space of 1 blink, and now there was a 12-year-old standing inside arm's reach with those pale silver blue eyes level on his and 1 hand coming up. Naruto pressed his open palm flat against Kankuro's chest. A square of blue energy formed around his hand, crackling at the edges, the size of a book, and he pushed his hand through. Not through skin. Nothing tore. There was no blood, no wound, no violence in it at all. His hand went into Kankuro's chest the way a hand goes into water. Past the ribs, past everything. Because inside the room, the boy in the hat decided what was solid and what wasn't. He closed his fingers on something. He pulled his hand back out. He was holding Kankuro's heart. It sat in his palm inside a cube of blue energy, and it was beating. Everyone in that arena could see it beating. It pulsed once, twice, in a fist in the open air. 12 inches away from the chest it belonged to. Kankuro made a sound that no human being in that room had ever heard another human being make. He went down on his knees. Both hands flew to his chest and found skin. Unbroken, whole, nothing wrong with it at all. And behind that skin, an emptiness with no physical explanation and absolutely no place in any part of his mind prepared to receive it. He could feel his own heartbeat. He could feel it in perfect detail. It was happening outside of his body in someone else's hand. "I have your heart," Naruto said. The arena went dead. "Let me walk the room for you. because the reactions are the whole reason people still talk about this. Tamari, in the balcony, had stopped breathing. Not by choice. Her body had simply forgotten to, and it stayed forgotten for 9 seconds, and when it started again, she made a noise like she'd surfaced from deep water. Baki, standing behind her, had to consciously remind himself to blink. He'd been on battlefields. He'd seen Jinchuriki fight. He looked down at a boy with his fist around a puppet master's living heart, and the phrase that went through his head was, "We have to leave this village." Kakashi Hatake had his book open in the Jonin gallery and hadn't turned a page in a while. Kurenai's hand was over her mouth. Asuma Saratobi took the cigarette out of his mouth, looked around for somewhere to put it, and put it out on the stone railing, grinding it down harder than the situation needed, because his hands wanted something to do, and screaming was off the table. Ino Yamanaka said out loud in a strangled voice, "That's not, you can't do that." And Sasuke Uchiha, who had spent the entire exam bored, sat forward and put both hands on the railing. And Gaara of the desert, who had been born into a world where the only law he understood was that he was the most dangerous thing in every room he walked into, stood in that balcony and went completely still. Because Gaara's entire existence rested on one guarantee: the sand, the absolute defense. Nothing had ever touched him, and nothing ever would, and that fact was the floor he stood on. He watched a boy skip past the concept of the outside of a person entirely. The sand in his gourd moved on its own. It came out of the mouth of it in a thin thread and hung in the air, and Gaara didn't notice, because for the first time in his entire life, he was thinking a thought he'd never had before. My defense is on the outside. Down on the floor, Naruto closed his fingers a little, just slightly. Kankuro's whole body seized. Every nerve he owned fired at once, and he made a sound like a man drowning on dry ground. "Surrender," Naruto said, "or I'll crush it." "Forfeit." It came out before Kankuro's brain had finished issuing the order to say it. His mouth simply did it. His body made an executive decision without consulting the rest of him, the way a hand pulls back from a stove. "Forfeit! Forfeit! I forfeit!" Naruto looked at the heart in his hand for one more second. Then he tossed it back into Kankuro's chest. Underhand. The way you'd return a borrowed pen. The cube of blue energy passed into the puppet master's ribcage. The glow faded, and Kankuro collapsed forward onto his hands with both palms flat on the stone, hauling in air in huge broken gulps, feeling his own heartbeat come back to the place it was supposed to be, and refusing, on principle, to believe that any of the last 30 seconds had happened to him. The proctor didn't call it for 4 full seconds. He was a professional, and he still needed 4 seconds. Winner, Naruto Uzumaki. And then the whole arena started talking at once, not cheering, talking. 140 people all turning to the person next to them and beginning a sentence at the same moment, and the noise of it hit the ceiling and came back down, and the proctor had to shout 3 times to be heard. Naruto walked back up the stairs to the Team 10 balcony with his hands in his coat pockets. Choji stared at him. Was that a real heart? Yes. Was it out of him? Yes. Choji sat down on the floor. Shikamaru hadn't taken his eyes off the arena. When he spoke, his voice was flatter than usual. "Anybody," he said. "You can do that to anybody. Inside the room." "Yes, Akagi. If they're inside the room." Shikamaru nodded slowly 3 times, and then he leaned his forehead against the railing and stayed like that for a bit. "Troublesome," he said to the stone. Then he lifted his head, and there was something in his face that hadn't been there before. The thing that would eventually make him most feared strategist of his generation. "Okay," he said. "Let's talk about who else you can do it to." Naruto looked at him, and for about a quarter of a second, so short that only Choji caught it, and Choji has been telling people about it ever since, the corner of Naruto Uzumaki's mouth moved. "Now you're being useful, Shikamaru-ya. There were other matches after that. Nobody remembers them. I mean that literally. Ask anyone who was in that arena what happened in matches 7 through 11, and they'll give you a blank look, because every single person in that room spent the rest of the afternoon in a private conversation with themselves about whether their heart was where they'd left it. 2 of the genin who won their matches did it against opponents who were visibly distracted. One boy from forfeited before his match started. He didn't explain. He went home. Ino Yamanaka cornered Naruto in the stairwell afterward, which took more courage than anything she did in her own match, and jabbed a finger at his chest. "You," she said, "are the most obnoxious person I have ever met in my entire life. I've said 11 words to you. You said 4 words to a guy in the middle of an arena, and he almost died of fear, and then you gave his heart back like it was a library book, and you didn't even do a pose." Ino was somewhere between furious and something else she wasn't ready to look at. "Do you know how insane you are? Does anybody tell you?" Shikamaru mentions it. "I'm going to mention it too. Fine, frequently. Fine." She stood there, out of momentum, with her finger still up. Naruto adjusted his hat and walked past her. 3 steps down the stairwell, without turning around, he said, "Your match. Second minute. You dropped your left guard when you shifted stance. Sakura didn't catch it. Somebody else will." Ino Yamanaka stood in that stairwell for a full minute after he was gone, going red for reasons she declined to examine, and then she said "ugh" to nobody at all, and stomped down the stairs. For the record, she fixed the left guard. She fixed it that week, and if you asked her why, she'd tell you she'd noticed it herself. She's lying. Everybody knows she's lying. The invasion during the finals is a story for another day, mostly because of how short it is. Here's the whole thing. Orochimaru launched his attack. Sand and sound came over the wall. The Kazakagi's box turned into a barrier with the 3rd Hokage inside it and 4 sound genin holding the corners. And in the middle of the arena, with 100 civilians running for the exits and a 3-headed snake coming through the north wall, Naruto Uzumaki said "room" and put a dome over a third of the village. He didn't fight the snake. He said "shambles." And the snake changed places with a water tower in the eastern district, and a summoned constrictor the size of a building found itself standing in 4 feet of water in a residential street. And the water tower found itself in the arena, where it burst and put out 3 fires. He didn't fight the invasion. He dismantled the invasion. He picked sound jonin off the walls in pairs and swapped them into each other's attacks. He put an Otogakure squad leader inside a supply warehouse and shut the door. He lifted a section of collapsed grandstand off 40 trapped civilians with 1 finger and set it down in the street. There was a moment in the East District, witnessed, verified in 3 separate Anbu reports, where a sound jonin got behind Naruto with a blade and Naruto didn't even turn around. He raised 2 fingers. Shambles. And the jonin ended up 80 feet in the air over the middle of the village, and Naruto pointed at a rooftop water tank and said "Takt," and put the tank up there with him. The invasion collapsed inside 40 minutes. Sand pulled out. Sound scattered. Hiruzen Sarutobi still died. That's the part nobody could fix. The barrier was designed to keep out exactly the kind of intervention that would have saved him, and by the time Naruto had cut through the North District and reached the roof, the 3rd Hokage was on the tiles with his hands folded and the Reaper's mark on his chest, and Orochimaru was gone with 2 useless arms. Naruto knelt next to the old man. He put a room over the rooftop and looked at him with those pale eyes, doing something behind them that a medic does when the answer is already known and gets checked anyway. "Don't," Hiruzen said. "I wasn't going to lie to you." "Good." The old man's breathing was wrong. "You were the worst decision I ever made. I know, and the one I regret least." Hiruzen managed something like a smile. "I let them put you in that room, Naruto, down in the hospital. I signed it. Everything you are came from a boy deciding to break a law I wrote." "Yes." "Will you tell me it was worth it?" Naruto looked at him for a long moment. "He'd have said yes," he said. "So no, old man, I won't tell you that." But he would have. Hiruzen Sarutobi laughed, and then he stopped, and the roof was very still. Naruto stood up. He took his hat off, held it against his chest for the length of 3 breaths, and put it back on. Then he went back down into the village, where there was work. Jiraiya found him a week later, sitting on the roof of the old academy building at dusk with Kikoku across his knees. The Toad Sage had a reputation for arriving loudly. He didn't this time. He came up the wall, sat down 4 feet away, and looked out at the village for a while before saying anything. "You're Minato's kid," he said eventually. "I'm aware." Jiraiya's head turned. "I read Nagiko Uzumaki's archive," Naruto said. Then I read every clan record in the tower that Hiruzen let me into, and a few he didn't. I worked it out when I was 9. Blonde hair, Uzumaki mother, a seal that only one man in the world could have made, and a village that treated me like ordnance instead of an orphan. It wasn't a hard problem, Jiraiya. And you never said anything. Who would I have said it to? Jiraiya didn't have an answer for that, and he had the grace to let the silence sit there and be uncomfortable. We need Tsunade, he said finally. The council's deadlocked, the village is bleeding, and the only person with the medical skill and the name to hold this place together is currently drinking her way through the gambling towns. I'm going to bring her back. I want you with me. Why? Because if Orochimaru comes for her, and he will, I'd like the odds better. Naruto considered that. Also, Jiraiya added, because I'd like a week to figure out who the hell you are, and travel's the only way I know to do it. Naruto stood up and put Kikoku over his shoulder. Fine. The week was educational for both of them. Jiraiya tried on day 2 to teach him the Rasengan. He got as far as the first stage before Naruto took the water balloon, looked at it, said room, and popped it from the inside without touching it. That's not the point of the exercise. It's a rotation and containment problem. I have a rotation and containment solution. That's not the point of the... Naruto learned it anyway. Took him 9 hours, which Jiraiya found personally offensive. On day 4, in a hot spring town, Jiraiya vanished for 3 hours doing research, and came back to find Naruto sitting at the end table with a stack of medical texts he'd bought, and a full anatomical diagram of a human circulatory system drawn from memory on the back of a menu, annotated in handwriting that was too good. You're a medic, Jiraiya said slowly. I'm a doctor. There's a difference, and it matters. What's the difference? A medic keeps shinobi in a fight. Naruto didn't look up. A doctor decides whether the fight was worth it. Jiraiya sat down across from him and didn't say anything for a while. Kid, he said, who was Shisui to you? Naruto's pen stopped moving. The pause lasted 4 seconds. From him, that's a scream. He was an idiot, Naruto said. He walked into door frames. He couldn't cook. He sang a song about a duck for an entire winter because it was the only one he knew all the way through. That's not what I asked. I know what you asked. Naruto started writing again. That's the answer. They found Tsunade in Tanzaku quarters at the same time Orochimaru did, which was less coincidence than scheduling. By the time Naruto and Jiraiya came around the corner into that street, the negotiation had already gone bad. A castle wall was down. Tsunade Senju was standing in the rubble with her fists clenched and her face white, staring at a man with yellow eyes and 2 ruined arms who was offering to fix them in exchange for something she should never have considered for even a second. And Kabuto Yakushi was standing at his master's shoulder with his glasses catching the light. I want to spend a second on Kabuto, because Kabuto's the one this arc belongs to. He was, at that point, the most dangerous person in Orochimaru's entire organization, and almost nobody understood that. Not the snakes, not the cursed seals, not the experiments in tanks, Kabuto. A medic nin with a talent for the human body so complete that he could sever a muscle with a touch and rebuild his own cells mid-fight. He'd killed Jonin. He'd fooled Anbu. He'd spent years walking through Konoha with a Genin headband on and a smile, and the reason he was still alive was that everyone kept underestimating the guy with the glasses. And Kabuto knew he was a genius. That was the whole problem with him. He'd built an entire personality around knowing it. He looked across that broken street at a 12-year-old in a fur hat, and the last thing he felt was concern. Jiraiya-sama, he said pleasantly, and the surgeon of Konoha, we've heard so much. Tsunade's head turned. Who? Him, Kabuto said, and green light bloomed around both his hands. Chakra scalpels. Blades of pure medical chakra, invisible edges that cut through muscle and nerve without breaking skin. The most refined killing tool in the medical field. Lord Orochimaru is curious about your technique, Kabuto said and started forward. I'll be taking you apart to answer his questions. Nothing personal, he smiled. I am a master of the human body, Naruto. I will sever your muscles. I will end this before it begins. Naruto drew Kikoku off his back. He held it low, at his side, and he looked at the green light around Kabuto's hands the way a professional looks at an amateur's tools laid out on a bench. You call yourself a doctor? He said. You're playing with toys." Kabuto's smile stopped being a smile. Then he came in, and he was fast, medic fast, which is a specific and awful thing, because a medic doesn't aim for your center of mass. He aims for the 14 places on your body where a 2-inch cut ends your career. Kabuto's opening went straight for the tendons in Naruto's sword arm. Room. The dome went up over the whole street. The rubble, the broken castle wall, Tsunade, Jiraiya, Orochimaru, all of it, inside a hum that made Orochimaru's eyes narrow to slits. Shambles. Kabuto's glasses vanished off his face. They reappeared on the ground 3 meters to his left. And I want to be honest about how small a thing that is, and how completely it decided the fight. Kabuto Yakushi was severely nearsighted. He built his combat style around the assumption that his eyes were a solved problem. His entire targeting method, the 14 places, the 2-inch cuts, depended on seeing exactly where his fingers were going. For 1/3 of 1 second, the world went soft at the edges, and Kabuto's brain had to stop and file a report about it. That 1/3 of a second was the entire rest of his life as he understood it. Naruto was behind him, not through speed, through the domain, through the shortcut that a room always provides to a man who owns it. One instant in front, the next behind, with no travel in between and no sound to warn anybody. A blade of green energy formed in his right hand. Short, maybe 8 inches, dense enough that the air around it bent. It hummed at a pitch that made Tsunade's teeth hurt from 30 feet away. Gamma knife. He drove it into Kabuto Yakushi's back. Nothing happened. I mean that visually. Nothing happened. There was no wound. There was no blood. Kabuto's coat wasn't even cut. The green blade went in and came out, and there was on the outside of that man no evidence at all that anything had occurred. What happened next is the part that Tsunade Senju has described exactly once, to a room of medical staff she'd sworn to secrecy, and she got through it in a flat voice and then went and sat down. Kabuto took one more step. Then his legs stopped. Then he screamed. It started high, and it went low, and it kept going down, past the range where a scream is a sound a person makes, and into the range where it's a sound a body makes on its own. He went down on the rubble and curled up around his own middle with both hands pressed to his stomach, and his hands lit up green with medical chakra on reflex, on instinct. Because that's what Kabuto Yakushi did when he was hurt. He fixed it. He always fixed it. He'd rebuilt a punctured lung mid-battle once and finished the fight. The green light on his hands guttered out. He tried again. Out again. Because his cellular regeneration required intact organs to draw from, and the gamma energy hadn't cut anything. It had gone through his skin, through his muscle wall, through everything he'd spent his whole life learning to protect, and it had wrecked the machinery inside, all at once, in every place at the same time, without leaving a single mark on the outside for him to find and treat. He was a genius medic, lying in the street with a body sending him distress signals from 14 directions, and absolutely no wound anywhere to explain any of them. He couldn't diagnose it. That's what broke him. Not the pain. He trained through pain. He was on his side in the rubble of Tanzaku quarters, and for the first time since he was a child in a war orphanage, Kabuto Yakushi did not know what was happening to his own body, and the sound he made stopped being a scream and became something lower and much worse. Naruto stood over him and looked down without any expression at all. "That's the difference," he said. "You cut the outside. I don't have to." Then he turned to Orochimaru. And here's the moment that decided everything that came after. Orochimaru of the Sannin, with 2 dead arms hanging at his sides, looked at a 12-year-old standing over the wreck of the best medic he had ever produced. And Orochimaru did the fastest, smartest calculation of his life. He'd spent decades building a body of work on one principle. Anything can be taken apart, studied, and rebuilt into something he owned. Cursed seals worked because they attacked the outside and rewrote it. Every technique in his library operated on flesh. He just watched something skip flesh entirely. He couldn't seal against it. He couldn't absorb it. He couldn't wear a body that would resist it, because there was no body that would resist it. That was the point. A cursed seal on a man is a lock on a door, and this boy had stopped using doors. Orochimaru's tongue flicked out and back. "Interesting," he said. Then he grabbed Kabuto by the collar and left. Jiraiya went to move and Tsunade caught his arm because Kabuto was screaming and the sound was doing something to the street that neither of them wanted to be standing in. The dome faded. Naruto sheathed Kikoku, and Tsunade Senju, Slug Princess, the greatest medical nin in the history of the shinobi world, a woman who had spent 50 years learning the human body one cell at a time and had personally written the textbooks that everyone else learned from, stood in the rubble and stared at a 12-year-old boy with black ink on his fingers. "Where?" she said. Her voice was flat. "Did that come from? Family inheritance? That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting." Tsunade took 2 steps toward him and stopped, and Jiraiya had never seen her look like that at anyone. "Do you understand what you just did?" she said. "There's nothing in chakra theory that does that. Nothing. Medical ninjutsu works on tissue. You channel into tissue, you accelerate cell division, you cut through tissue, everything is tissue. That's the whole field. You went through a man's outside like it was a suggestion and destroyed the inside of him without touching either." She was breathing hard. "That's not a jutsu. That's a different set of rules." "Yes. Can you do it in reverse?" Naruto looked at her. "And this is the moment, and I want you to have it in full because it's the reason Tsunade Senju came home." "Yes," he said. Tsunade's hand went to her mouth. "I can operate inside a body without opening it," Naruto said. "I can move a tumor out of an organ without a single cut. I can take a nerve that's been severed and put it back in place, or take a man in 8 pieces and make him whole in a minute and a half, and he'll walk out of the room the same day. I can hold a heart in my hand while it's still connected to the man it belongs to and fix the valve, and he'll be awake and he won't feel anything at all." He adjusted his hat. "The killing is the least interesting thing this does. I use it that way because that's what the village pays me for." Tsunade Senju stood in the ruins of a gambling town and thought about her little brother. She thought about Dan, bleeding out on a table under her hands with everything she knew, and it hadn't been enough. She thought about the 20-year phobia she'd built out of that, and the 50,000 ryu of debt, and all the years spent running from a field she'd been the best in the world at, because the field had a ceiling and she'd hit it and it had cost her everything she loved. And then a boy in a fur hat told her the ceiling was a suggestion. "You'll teach it," she said. "In Konoha, to the hospital. I'll build you a wing and staff it with whoever you want, and you will teach what you can teach. Most of it can't be taught. It's a bloodline seal. Then you'll teach what can be." Tsunade's jaw set. "And you'll operate. I want you in a hospital, Uzumaki, at least 1 day in 7. If half of what you just said is true, then every hour you spend killing people instead of fixing them is an hour this world can't afford." Naruto considered her. "You'll be Hokage. I'll be Hokage." Tsunade wiped rubble dust off her hands. "Somebody has to keep an eye on you. That's the first honest reason anybody's given me. Get used to it, brat." Jiraiya, standing off to the side, said nothing at all. He'd come out here to convince Tsunade to come home, and he hadn't gotten to open his mouth. He'd been reduced to a bystander in about 4 minutes by a genin he was theoretically escorting. Later, walking back toward the Fire Country border, he'd catch up to Naruto on the road and say, "You made that look easy. The Kabuto thing. It was easy. That's what bothers me." Naruto walked another 20 steps before answering. "Jiraiya, do you know why I agreed to come out here? Because we needed a Hokage. Because Tsunade Senju is the only person alive who could look at what I do and understand it," Naruto said. "And I'd rather she was in Konoha where I can talk to her than out here drinking." A pause. "There's a technique I haven't been able to build yet. She might know why." "What technique?" Naruto didn't answer. He'd been trying since he was 8 years old to work out the operation that the man whose memories he carried had died to protect, the one they called the perennial youth operation. Give a life, extend a life, a trade with the world where the doctor pays and the patient walks away. He'd never told a single person that he'd been working on it. He wasn't going to start on a road in the land of fire. Tsunade Senju took the hat that autumn, and Konoha started breathing again, and for about 4 months things were almost normal. Then Sasuke Uchiha left in the night. You need context, so here it is. Fast. In this version of things, Sasuke had spent 4 years watching a boy his own age do impossible things at arm's length and hating it more every single time. He'd never once fought Naruto. Not in the academy, not after. Naruto had never taken a spar with him, never engaged, never even looked at him with the kind of attention Sasuke needed to feel like the rivalry existed. That's worse than losing. Sasuke could have handled losing. He got the curse seal during the exams. Orochimaru marked him in the finals chaos, a parting gift and a hook. And for 4 months, Sasuke Uchiha sat in that village with a mark on his neck that whispered, and every time he heard the name Surgeon of Konoha in the street, the whisper got louder. He went over the wall on a Thursday. The Sound Four came for him at the border. Tsunade got the report at 3 in the morning. Kakashi wanted a retrieval squad. She said no. Hokage-sama, with respect. With respect, Kakashi, I've read his file. Tsunade was already writing. Sasuke Uchiha has spent 4 years training against your students. He knows Sakura's timing. He knows Ino's range. He knows every technique your team has, and he's built counters for all of it. Because that's what he does. That boy prepares. You send a squad of his classmates after him, and he goes through them, and then I've got 4 hospital beds and 1 missing Uchiha. Then who? Tsunade signed the paper and held it out. The one person in this village he's never studied, she said, because Naruto never gave him anything to study. Naruto took the contract at 4 in the morning in the Hokage's office. He read it once. Alive? Alive. Whole? Tsunade looked up. Define whole. I can bring him back in one piece and unable to move, Naruto said. Or I can bring him back able to move and take 4 days longer while he runs. Pick. Tsunade rubbed her eyes. Bring him back, she said. I'll fix whatever's left. You won't have to fix anything. That's the point. He was out the window before she'd finished her next breath. He caught Sasuke at the Valley of the End at dusk on the second day. If you've never seen the place, 2 stone giants standing 100 feet tall on either side of a waterfall, Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha, carved into the cliffs a century ago and facing each other across a gorge with the river roaring between them. Rain had come in that afternoon and hadn't left. The autumn leaves were coming off the trees along the top of the gorge and falling down through the mist in slow spirals. Sasuke was standing on Madara's head. He'd already gone all the way. Curse mark stage 2, skin gone gray-white, hair down past his shoulders and lightened to the color of ash. A black star spreading across his face and 2 great webbed hand-shaped wings unfolded off his back in dripping rain. The chakra pouring off him was foul. You could feel it 50 meters away, in your throat, like standing downwind of something burning that shouldn't be. Naruto stood on the surface of the water below, hands in his coat pockets, hat brim dripping. You came alone? Sasuke called down. Nobody else was necessary. Sasuke laughed. It came out wrong. The seal did things to his voice. You don't understand my vision, Naruto. He spread his arms and the wings spread with them. None of you do. You have this thing, this gift, and you use it for D ranks and hospital shifts. I've watched you throw it away for 4 years. 4 years. 4 years. Do you know what I would do with what you have? Nothing useful. I need power. Sasuke's voice cracked. I need more than this village will ever give me. Itachi killed my entire family in one night, and he's out there breathing. And every day I stay in Konoha, I get a little further from being able to do anything about it. Orochimaru will give me what I need, so step aside, or I'll go through you. But don't stand there and pretend you have the right to judge. Naruto tipped his head back and looked up at him. He looked at him for a long time, long enough that the rain filled the space. And what he said in a voice that was almost gentle, which from him was worse than anything. There are things you can't see unless you change your standing. Sasuke stopped. Something crossed his face. A flicker. The specific expression of a person hearing a sentence they were going to think about at 2 in the morning for the rest of their life, and hating it, and knowing they'd think about it anyway. Then the rage came back up over it, because with Sasuke, at that point, the rage always won. Black lightning gathered in his right hand. Not blue, black, shot through with purple, the curse seal's version of the Chidori, and the sound it made wasn't chirping. It roared. The air around his fist tore open, and the rain around him turned to steam, and the stone under his feet cracked in a spider web. "I'll kill you!" He came off Madara's head like a thrown spear. 100 meters of drop with the wings folded back for speed, black lightning howling, and I'll say this for him. That attack would have killed almost anybody in that village. Kakashi would have needed the Sharingan and a wall. Might Guy would have needed a gate. Naruto took one hand out of his pocket. Room. And this one is the one people still argue about. The dome came off him and it didn't stop. It swallowed the river. It swallowed both statues, Hashirama and Madara, 100 feet of carved stone each. It went up past the top of the gorge and out across the tree line, and it closed over the waterfall, over the entire valley, over the storm clouds sitting on it. And the last of it locked shut somewhere above the rain. Every falling leaf in that valley was inside it, every raindrop between the cloud and the water. Every stone in both statues, every leader in the river, every insect in the grass at the top of the cliff. Sasuke Uchiha was 90 meters away and closing at terminal velocity with enough lightning in his fist to core a building. And absolutely none of it mattered because he was inside the sphere. And inside the sphere, Naruto Uzumaki decides what happens. 3 seconds to impact. 2. Shambles. The black Chidori hit a leaf. One single autumn leaf, orange, half rotten, drifting down through the rain 40 feet above the river. Sasuke's attack connected with it dead center. The leaf ceased to exist in a flash of purple light, and the lightning discharged into open air and rain with a crack that rolled down the valley and came back twice. And Sasuke Uchiha found himself standing chest deep in the river, 10 meters downstream, facing the wrong way. He didn't understand. That's the thing I keep coming back to with this fight. He genuinely didn't understand. He had 2 Sharingan open at 3 Tomoe each and a curse seal feeding him more chakra than any genin in history had ever held. And his eyes had recorded every single frame of the last 2 seconds, and none of them contained an explanation. He'd been in the air. Now he was in water. There was no transition. His brain went looking for the missing piece and came back empty and reported it as a malfunction. He spun around in the water, wings dragging, throwing up spray. Where he looked up, Naruto was standing on the waterfall, not on a rock. On the water, vertical, halfway up the falls, coat and hat streaming, standing on a 100-foot column of falling river like it was a staircase. And Kikoku was out of the sheath and the blade was wrapped in something. Blue-white electricity crawled up and down the length of it. Not lightning chakra, something else, arcing off the edge and threads that snapped and reached, throwing light through the falling water, so the whole waterfall glowed around him. Sasuke's Sharingan tried to read it. The Sharingan copies chakra. It watches the flow, learns the shape, and reproduces it. That's the gift. That's the thing that's made the Uchiha the most feared clan in the world for 1,000 years. Sasuke Uchiha looked at Kikoku with both eyes wide open at full power and saw nothing to copy. Because there was nothing to copy. What was on that blade wasn't a nature transformation, and it wasn't a technique in any registry. It was space itself, taken apart and made hostile, and there is no eye in the world that can steal that. The last thing Sasuke saw was a boy in a spotted hat coming down the waterfall. Radio knife. 1 slash, shoulder to hip, 1 clean line, no wasted motion, and Naruto came through the falling water and out the other side of him and landed on the river. The wings came apart first, not cut. Disconnected. The chakra feeding them from the seal severed at the source, so they simply stopped being a part of him and came off in 2 great gray sheets that hit the water and started drifting downstream. The star pattern on Sasuke's face faded out like ink in water. The curse mark retreated up his neck and went dormant. And then his nervous system, every signal his brain was sending, stopped arriving. It happened all at once, from the neck down, with no pain at all. One instant he had a body, and the next instant he had a report about a body, filed from somewhere far away by someone he'd never meet. The black lightning in his right hand went out because there was nothing telling his hand to hold it. His legs stopped. He went straight down into the river and would have gone under, except a hand closed on the back of his collar and hauled him up. Naruto stood in the water with Sasuke Uchiha hanging from one fist, dripping, fully conscious, eyes wide, absolutely unable to move a single thing below his jaw. He shifted him up over one shoulder like a rolled carpet. Then he sheathed Kikoku with a click that echoed off both statues and went walking toward the bank in no hurry, water pouring off the hem of a coat that had been too big for him for 6 years. Sasuke tried to talk. He got out one word, and it was how, and it came out cracked. Naruto kept walking. "You spent 4 years building counters for everyone in your class," he said. "Sakura's genjutsu timing, Ino's transfer range, Kakashi's field of vision. You've got a file in your head for every person in Konoha who might have come after you." He stepped up onto the bank. "You never made one for me. Do you know why?" Sasuke didn't answer, because he couldn't. "Because I never gave you anything to build on," Naruto said. "I never sparred with you. I never took your challenges. I never used a technique in front of you that I actually rely on." He adjusted his grip on the collar. "You thought I was ignoring you. I was making sure that if this day ever came, you'd arrive at it blind." He started up the path out of the valley. "I decided that when you were 9, Sasuke-ya. You've been in a fight you couldn't win for 3 years. You just found out today." And then he didn't say anything else. That's the part that finished it. 2 full days of walking, most of it in the rain, and Naruto Uzumaki said absolutely nothing else to Sasuke Uchiha for the entire trip. He stopped to eat. He stopped to sleep and set the Uchiha upright against a tree with a coat over him so he wouldn't get cold. He checked the nerve block twice a day with a hand on the back of Sasuke's neck and a look of complete indifference, the way you check a tire. And Sasuke was awake for every second of it. Awake, looking at the back of a spotted fur hat, listening to the shift of a nodachi against its sheath, feeling the total absolute stillness of his own body, and thinking, you cannot make a man like Sasuke Uchiha listen to a speech. He's been given speeches. Kakashi gave him speeches. Sakura gave him speeches. Every speech that boy ever received went in one ear and out the other, because speeches are just people wanting things from you. But 2 days of silence carried on someone else's shoulder, with nothing in your head but your own thoughts and the sound of somebody else's footsteps. That works. They came through Konoha's North Gate at midday on the 3rd day, and the whole village saw it. Word travels. By the time Naruto was 200 meters out, there were people on the wall. By the time he reached the gate, there was a crowd in the street. A 12-year-old boy in a spotted hat and a threadbare coat, walking at an even pace with the last of the Uchiha over one shoulder, unmarked, unbloodied, breathing normally, carrying the most dangerous genin in the village's history like a sack of rice. Nobody cheered. That's the detail I always come back to. In any other story, there's a cheer. Konoha went silent instead. Hundreds of people lined that street and watched him walk down the middle of it, and what came off that crowd wasn't celebration. It was the sound a village makes when it fully understands, all at once, what's living inside it. Kotetsu, at the gate desk, didn't ask for the paperwork. Sakura Haruno pushed through the crowd about halfway down the street with her hands over her mouth. She got in front of him and stopped, and she looked at Sasuke hanging over his shoulder, and her face did about 6 things. Is he alive, awake, unhurt? Why isn't he moving? Because I turned him off, Naruto said and kept walking. Sakura stood there in the street. Ino got to her about 10 seconds later and put an arm around her, and Ino watched Naruto's back all the way to the hospital doors with an expression that had a lot going on in it, and only one part of it was fear. At the top of the street, Shikamaru Nara stood on a rooftop with his hands in his pockets and watched the whole thing from the gate to the hospital without moving. He didn't say a word to anybody for a full minute afterward. Choji, next to him, waited. Then Shikamaru said, he walked out of here 2 days ago and came back with the one thing everybody said was impossible. No injuries, no collateral, no noise. Yeah, Choji. Shikamaru was still watching the hospital doors. Every village in the world is going to hear about this inside a month, and they're all going to have the same thought. What thought? That there's only one of him, Shikamaru said, and that if they ever want the world to look different, they have to get to him before somebody else does. Choji stopped chewing. That's really troublesome, he said. Yeah, said Shikamaru Nara. It is. Tsunade met him at the hospital doors, and she took one look at Sasuke's eyes, tracking her from over Naruto's shoulder, and understood exactly what had been done. Nerve conduction? severed at the cervical junction, clean cut, no tissue damage, no inflammation. Naruto set Sasuke down on a gurney like he was placing a book on a shelf. It'll come back on its own in about 30 hours. Do you want me to accelerate it? Tsunade looked down at Sasuke Uchiha, who was staring at the ceiling because that's the only direction he was capable of looking. No, she said. Let him have the 30 hours. I thought you might say that. You knew I'd say that. She pinched the bridge of her nose. One day, brat, you're going to do something I don't see coming. I do it constantly. You've stopped noticing. Tsunade laughed despite herself, and then she stopped laughing because she just remembered who she was talking to. Sasuke Uchiha lay in a hospital bed for 31 hours with a body that did nothing. Sakura came. She cried at him. He looked at the ceiling. Kakashi came. He said something about roads and choices, and Sasuke looked at the ceiling. Ino came, mostly to see Sakura, and she stood in the doorway for a minute and then said, "You know what the worst part is? He didn't even hate you." And Sasuke, for the first time, looked at somebody. He wasn't angry when he came after you, Ino said. Everyone in the village saw him walk in. He looked bored, Sasuke. Then she left. Sasuke looked at the ceiling for 8 more hours. Here's the moment. 31 hours in, feelings started to come back in his left hand. He felt his fingers before he could move them. Pins and needles, the awful crawling return of a limb that had been switched off. And he lay there in the half-light with a hand that was slowly becoming his again. And he thought about a sentence. There are things you can't see unless you change your standing. He'd spent 4 years standing in exactly one place, on top of a pile of everything that had been taken from him, looking up at his brother, and everything in his life, every friend, every teacher, every meal, every conversation, had been evaluated from that single vantage point. Does it get me closer to Itachi, or does it not? He'd been so certain the view from up there was the truth. And a boy his own age had picked him up off that pile, put him on a shoulder, and carried him 2 days downhill without saying a word, and from down here, the pile looked a lot smaller than it had from the top of it. Sasuke Uchiha moved his index finger. Then he said out loud to an empty hospital room, in a voice that hadn't been used in a day and a half, "Damn it." He didn't leave the village again. I'm not going to tell you he became a good man that day. He didn't. It took years, and there's a whole second half to that, and some of it gets ugly. But he didn't leave. And when Tsunade came in the next morning and asked him what he wanted to do, he sat up in the bed, put his feet on the floor, and said, "I want to fight him." Absolutely not. Not now. Sasuke looked at his hands. Someday, when it'd be a fight. Tsunade folded her arms. "That's the first thing you've said in 4 years that I like," she said. "There's one more thing that happened that week, and then I'll let you go. Because this is where part 1 ends, and the rest is a different kind of story." 3 nights after the return, at around 2 in the morning, an old man was sitting alone in an office beneath the Anbu headquarters. Danzo Shimura. Bandaged eye, bandaged arm, cane against the desk. He'd been reading the Valley of the End report for the 4th time, and he'd been coming to a conclusion about it. And the conclusion was that the Uzumaki boy had become a strategic asset too valuable to leave in the hands of a woman who thought hospitals mattered. He had a plan drafted. It involved 12 operatives, a sealing team, and a window of 4 minutes. He set the report down, and the room hummed. Danzo Shimura had been a shinobi for 60 years. He was on his feet with his hand on the cane before the sound finished, and the blue dome had already closed over the office and the 4 rooms around it. Naruto Uzumaki was sitting in the chair on the other side of the desk. He had his hat in his lap. He had his elbows on the arms of the chair. He looked, honestly, a bit tired. "Sit down, Danzoya." The old man did not sit down. He opened his mouth, and I want you to appreciate that Danzo Shimura, in that moment, was going to say something clever and cutting and full of the specific poison he'd spent 6 decades perfecting. He got out 1 syllable. Naruto lifted his hand. There was a cube of blue energy in it, the size of a book, crackling at the corners. Inside the cube, an old man's heart was beating. Danzo's remaining eye went wide. He hadn't felt it happen. There was no sensation at all. He'd been standing there with his hand on his cane the whole time, and his chest was whole and unbroken, and there was nothing inside it. Uzushio, Naruto said. 9 operatives. You gave the order on the 18th of the 10th month. The seal on the file is yours. I've had a copy of it for 4 years. Danzo said nothing. His hand was flat against his own chest. Shisui Uchiha was 21, Naruto said. He walked into door frames. He couldn't cook rice without ruining it. He carried a dying kid across a continent for a year because nobody else in this village would get out of a chair. He turned the cube slowly in his hand, watching it. You sent 9 men to kill him for it, and one of them told him he died for a demon, and he laughed, Danzo-ya. That's the thing you should understand about the man you had killed. He was standing in a hole in the ground, bleeding out, and he thought that line was funny. Danzo's jaw worked. You won't, he said. Say the rest. You won't do it. Killing me tonight puts you outside the village, and you know it. Tsunade would have to act. The fire daimyo would demand. I know, Naruto said. That's why you're still talking. He set the cube on the desk. It sat there between them, pulsing, throwing blue light on the papers. Here's what happens now, he said. You're going to shred the plan you drafted tonight. You're going to close Root's operations against Konoha personnel. And you're going to live for a while. In a village where the strongest person in it can reach into your chest from 4 rooms away anytime he feels like it. And go to sleep every night knowing that. He stood up and put the hat back on. You built your whole life on being the one who decides things in the room nobody else can get into, Naruto said. There's no such room anymore. I want you to sit in that. He reached out, took the cube off the desk, and tossed it underhand into the old man's chest. Danzo Shimura staggered against the wall with both hands over his heart and made a sound that no one else in the world ever heard him make. At the door, Naruto stopped. One more thing. Danzo looked up. When I come back for it, Naruto said, you'll know. The dome faded off the walls. The chair was empty. Danzo Shimura stood alone in an office beneath Anbu headquarters at 2 in the morning with both hands pressed to his own chest, and for the first time since he was 9 years old, the old man was afraid. He stayed like that until the sun came up. That's the part of the story people always want confirmed, and I can confirm it because a Root operative named Fuyamanaka came in at 6 to deliver a report and found the head of Root standing against the wall with his palms flat on his own sternum and his eye fixed on an empty chair. Fu asked if he was well. Danzo told him to get out. Then Danzo shredded 11 pages of operational planning by hand, 1 sheet at a time, and did not delegate it. Root's file on Naruto Uzumaki was closed that week. Officially, it was reclassified as monitoring only, passive. Unofficially, every operative who had ever been assigned to the boy was rotated out to border postings because Danzo Shimura had decided, in the space of one night, that he no longer wanted anyone in that organization to have a reason to be in the same room as the kid. The old man lived another 6 years. He never came for what he'd been promised. He died in his sleep, which was more than he'd earned, and I've heard people say Naruto let him have that on purpose. I don't think that's true. I think Naruto simply forgot to be interested. The Chunin exam finals went ahead 9 days later, and I want you to understand what that stadium looked like. Every delegation in the world had sent someone. Kumo sent 2 Jonin observers who took notes the entire time. Kiri sent a man who did nothing but watch the Konoha section. Iwa sent a delegation of 4, and every one of them had a bingo book in their coat. The fire daimyo's box was full. The civilian stands were packed to the rails, and half of those people had bought tickets in the last week, after word got out about a boy who walked in through the north gate with an Uchiha over his shoulder and didn't have a scratch on him. Nobody was there for the exam. Everybody was there for the exhibit. Naruto came out onto that arena floor with Kikoku over his shoulder, and 40,000 people made a sound like the tide going out. His opponent was a Suna Jonin named Sokaku, entered under a false Genin registration, which is a thing that happens more often at these exams than any village will admit. He was 31. He was a tracker hunter specialist with a rig on his back, holding 42 throwing weapons on retractable wire, and Suna had sent him with one instruction: get combat data on the Konoha Jinchuriki and come home with it. He was good at his job. He'd done this 11 times to 11 other people. The proctor dropped his hand and Sokaku went straight up, vertical launch, wire rig blooming open behind him like something unfolding out of a nightmare. 42 blades deploying in a fan and coming down on the arena floor from every angle at once. A cage of steel with no gap in it. Naruto raised 2 fingers. Room. The stadium hummed. I mean the actual structure. 40,000 people felt the stone under them change frequency, and the noise died in every throat in the building at the same instant. Shambles. 42 weapons vanished off their wires. They reappeared in an arrangement above Sokaku's head, point down in a neat rectangle, like tools laid out on a tray. The wire rig was still attached to all of them. Sokaku had a quarter of a second to understand what had happened to his own equipment, and then Naruto lifted one finger and said, "Tocked," and the whole array came down, not fast. That's the thing. It came down slow and heavy, like a lid closing, and Sokaku's own wires dragged him up into it as it fell. And 42 blades and 100 meters of tension cable folded around Asuna Jonin in midair and drove him into the arena floor hard enough to crack the stone in a ring 6 meters wide. He got up. He was a professional. He got up with wire wrapped around both arms and blood in his mouth, and he made it to one knee. Naruto walked forward 3 steps and put the tip of Kikoku against the man's chest. Injection shot. The spatial charge went down the blade and through him and out the other side, and it did not open his skin, and Sokaku's legs stopped working from the hip down, while the rest of him stayed perfectly, horribly awake. He looked up at a boy in a fur hat. "I forfeit," he said, and he said it fast. 43 seconds. There's a clock in the Konoha archive that recorded it, because the exam board timed every match that year for the records, and the number is written on the sheet in a proctor's handwriting with a small ink blot next to it where his pen sat too long. The Kumo observers stopped writing at the 30-second mark. One of them told me, years later, that he stopped because he realized he was taking notes on a natural process. And you don't take notes on weather. You just get inside. Iwa's delegation had a whispered conversation in the stands that lasted the entire time it took to carry Sokaku off the field. And in the competitor's box, Gaara of the Desert sat with his arms crossed and his sand moving around his feet in a slow circle, and he did not look at the arena. He looked at Naruto's back the whole time. Then it was Gaara's match, and that's when the sky went strange. Feathers. The genjutsu came down over the stadium in a wave. That specific soft weight that sits on your eyelids and tells you it's time to stop. And 40,000 people started slumping in their seats. The Kazekage's litter came apart. 4 sound shinobi hit the corners of the roof, and the barrier went up around the Kage box with the 3rd Hokage inside it. And the north wall came down under a summon the size of a warehouse. The whole thing was designed to hit at once. It was, honestly, a good plan. Naruto was already standing. He didn't run to the wall. He didn't go for the civilians. He didn't shout for Asuma, who was 3 sections over and already up with both knives out. He walked toward the Kage box, down the competitor's stairs, out onto the roof access, up the outer wall at a pace that would embarrass a person in a hurry, and Shikamaru, who had shaken off the genjutsu in about 2 seconds because he'd been half asleep already and the technique had nothing to grab, watched him go and said something into the noise that nobody heard. Up on the roof, the barrier was purple and humming, and inside it, Hiruzen Sarutobi was in a bad place. Orochimaru had already dropped the Kazekage's face. He had already summoned 2 coffins out of the tiles, and the 1st and 2nd Hokage were already standing there with their eyes white and their hands ready. He had already gotten his hands on the old man's wrists, and he was saying something in that voice, that long, slow voice, like something dragging itself over gravel, about how Sensei should have killed him when he had the chance. Naruto arrived at the edge of the roof. He looked at the barrier. He looked at the 2 dead Hokage. He looked at the Snake Lord with his tongue out and his eyes yellow and his whole overdone presentation, and his face registered the amount of interest you give a shop window. Orochimaru's head turned. "Ah," he said, "the specimen. You should have stayed afraid." Then the room expanded. It came off him and it took the roof, the barrier, the 4 sound shinobi holding the corners, both dead Hokage, the 3rd, Orochimaru, and about a third of the stadium's upper structure. And Orochimaru of the Sannin, a man who had spent 30 years being the most unpleasant surprise in every room he entered, felt the pressure close over him and made a face I would have paid to see from closer, because the barrier didn't matter. That's what got him. 4 sound. 4 holding a technique specifically designed to make the inside of that roof a sealed world, and the blue came through it like it was a rumor. Tact. 4 sections of stadium seating tore out of the structure below, not small pieces, full rows, stone, iron bracing, the anchor still trailing rubble, each one the size of a cart, ripped free and hauled up into the air over the roof by nothing at all, turning slow. Then they came in on 4 vectors at once. Jirobo saw his coming and put both arms up, which was the correct instinct for a man built the way he was built, and it was still like watching someone try to catch a landslide. Kidomaru went off the roof entirely. Sakan and Ukon got clipped and rolled, and the barrier's north corner went out with them, and the whole purple wall stuttered and dropped. Tayuya, on the west corner, made it back to her feet with her flute already up. She'd taken a graze. Her bone structure was doing the thing that cursed seals do, knitting, hardening, coming back wrong and strong. Naruto turned Kikoku in his hand and swept it once through empty air. Amputate. Tayuya came apart into 6 pieces on the roof tiles, and every piece of her was awake and fine, and screaming with a mouth that was 11 feet from the lungs that should have been driving it. Hiruzen Sarutobi, on his knees with the second Hokage's blade an inch from his ribs, turned his head and watched that happen. Orochimaru went for the exit. I want to be fair to him. He read the situation in under 2 seconds, which is faster than almost anyone alive would have managed, and he did the smart thing. He started the living corpse rebirth, the shed, the reset, the white snake coming out of the old mouth to walk away and start again somewhere with a new face. He'd done it before. It had never once failed. Naruto lifted his hand while the technique was still opening. Shambles. He didn't swap Orochimaru with an object. He swapped the 2 halves of the transition, the thing coming out and the thing being left behind, and put them in each other's space in the middle of the handoff. I don't know how to describe what that did. Nobody does. The sound was wrong. Orochimaru came out of it in one body, his own, whole, and the white snake never finished emerging, and something in his chakra network sat crooked from that day forward and never fully straightened. He hit the tiles on one knee, hissing, and his eyes came up. Naruto was already there, blue field crawling up the length of Kiko, thick, humming, throwing light across the roof. K-room. He drove the blade through Orochimaru's chest. Understand what that means with this man. Orochimaru's body was, at that point, less a body than a nest. Layers of snakes, replaceable tissue, a physical structure built specifically so that nothing that pierces it can find anything vital, because there is nothing vital, because he'd spent decades removing the concept of vital from himself. The K-room field didn't pierce him. It went through the idea of him, through the layers, through the substitution, through every trick in that man's 40-year library, and it left the spatial charge sitting inside all of it at once. Naruto let go of the hilt, put his open palm flat against the entry point, and pushed. Shock will. The Kaji box came apart. The roof went. Half the upper stadium wall went. A pressure wave came off that rooftop and blew every remaining pane of glass out of the Hokage Tower 200 meters away, and 40,000 people in the stands below, the ones awake enough to see it, watched a white column of force punch up out of the top of the arena and keep going into the clouds. Orochimaru of the legendary Sannin hit the far wall in 3 pieces. He reformed. Of course he reformed. He always reforms. The man is a cockroach with a doctorate. The pieces found each other, and something crawled back together in the rubble and stood up on legs that were not entirely finished being legs. But it took him 11 seconds, and he was bleeding. Actually bleeding, from a body that had spent decades not bothering with that, and one of his arms had come back with the elbow facing the wrong way, and he had to fix it by hand while he stood there. He looked across the wreckage at a 12-year-old picking a nodachi up out of the tiles. "What?" Orochimaru said. "Are you?" "I don't negotiate with the dead." Naruto raised Kikoku, and Orochimaru ran. That's the whole thing. There's no last exchange. There's no final technique. The man who had come to Konoha to kill his teacher and take the village apart looked at a child on a broken roof and made the correct decision for the first time in his adult life. And he was gone over the eastern wall in 3 seconds with what was left of his arm hanging. The invasion collapsed behind him inside 12 minutes. Sand's forces got the withdrawal order from Baki, who had made his own calculation the moment the Kage box went up. Sound scattered without leadership. The barrier was down. Hiruzen Sarutobi was sitting on the tiles of his own rooftop with the Reaper's technique unformed in his hands. Alive, holding his ribs, looking at a boy who had just done in under 4 minutes what the old man had been preparing to trade his soul for. He didn't say thank you. He knew better. Your father, Hiruzen said, would be. Don't, Naruto said. Get up. There are people under the north stands. And that's what he did with the rest of that afternoon. He put a room over the collapsed section and lifted 1,100 tons of stadium off 92 civilians with 2 fingers and set it down in the street. And then he went into the wreckage and pulled people out with his hands like everybody else. When the room finally faded off the stadium and the genjutsu broke and 40,000 people woke up to see the top of the Kage box missing and a crater where the roof had been, the noise they made was nothing at all. Complete silence in a stadium built to hold a roar. They'd come to see an exhibit. Now, Gaara, he hadn't moved. Through the invasion, through the summons, through Kankuro dragging at his shoulder and Tamari shouting at him and Baki's withdrawal order coming down the line twice. Gaara of the desert had sat in the competitor's box with his arms crossed and watched the roof. When it was over, he stood up and walked down onto the arena floor. The sand came with him. It was already out of the gourd. It was moving in a slow loop around his ankles and up his back, and there was a texture on the left side of his face that was starting to be something other than skin. Shukaku was up, the blood in the air, the screaming, the specific charge of a village in the middle of being attacked. All of it had been feeding a thing inside him that had been fed every day of his life and had never once been told to stop. Naruto came down the stairs from the roof with his coat gray with dust. The arena was empty. Everyone had gone. The crowd out the gates, the shinobi to the walls, the medics to the north stands. Just the 2 of them on a floor with a crack in it. Gaara's sand rose off the ground. Naruto looked at it. Then he sat down on a chunk of broken arena wall, put Kikoku across his knees, and waited. The sand stopped. That's it. That's the whole trick. And I've heard people call it strategy, and I've heard people call it luck, and I don't think it was either. Every single person in Gaara's entire life had responded to that sand by getting ready. Guards, assassins, his own father, his own siblings. The sand goes up. The other person braces. That's the shape of every interaction he'd ever had. Somebody sat down. Shukaku's face receded 1/4 of an inch out of Gaara's cheek and hung there, stuck, because the thing had no instruction for this. You're the one with the dog thing inside you, Naruto said. The one who makes sand. Gaara's eye twitched. You're not afraid of me. I've held 3 people's hearts outside their bodies, Naruto said. You'll have to be more specific about what I should be afraid of. The sand came down about 1 foot. I kill people, Gaara said. It's the only reason I exist. I feel it. When I take someone, I feel real. That's the only time. His voice was doing something strange at the edges. You should be afraid. You've been trying to prove you exist by removing other people from existing, Naruto said. That's a bad system. It has to keep running or the proof expires. You've noticed. Gaara didn't answer. You have? Naruto said. That's why you're standing in an empty stadium talking to me instead of going home with your village. The sand came down the rest of the way. It sat on the arena floor around Gaara's feet like something that had been running for a long time and had finally been allowed to stop. What's the other system? Gaara asked. Naruto stood up and put Kikoku over his shoulder. Find one person who'd be worse off if you weren't here, he said. Then keep them that way. It's not complicated and it takes about 40 years and it's the only version that holds. He started toward the stairs. Who's yours? Gaara said. Naruto stopped for exactly 1 step's worth of time. He's dead, he said. It still counts. Then he went up the stairs and out. and Gara of the desert stood alone in the wreckage of the Konoha Chunin exam arena, with the sand lying still around his feet for the first time in 11 years. And Tamari found him there 40 minutes later, and she said afterward that she had walked all the way up to him before she realized what was different. And what was different was that he was breathing slowly. 6 months later, Akatsuki came. The world had spent half a year chewing on the invasion. The version in the bingo books by then was 3 sentences long and half wrong, and it ended with the note, Uzumaki, Naruto. Konohagakure, S rank, flee on sight, do not engage in enclosed terrain. Kumo's book added, do not engage in open terrain either. Tsunade had come back to run the hospital while Hiruzen recovered, and one of the first things she did was sign a document declaring the preliminary matches, the finals bout, and the invasion response a 3-part Jonin field examination, and then promote Naruto directly to Jonin at 13 years old, before the council had finished convening to argue about it. The council argued anyway. Tsunade let them. Then she pointed out that the alternative was leaving the most dangerous person in the village on a genin's stipend and a genin's oversight, and asked which of them wanted to explain that arrangement to him personally. The vote was unanimous. Itachi Uchiha and Kasame Hoshigaki crossed the Land of Fire border on a Thursday night in the rain. Itachi had done his preparation. He had the patrol rotations. He had the gate schedules. He had a plan that involved coming in through the eastern approach at the shift change and being out with the Jinchuriki before the alarm reached the tower. There was one thing his file didn't have. Naruto had been extending his room in a slow pulse for 3 days. Not the full dome, just the thinnest layer of it. A sense laid over 4 kilometers of forest, like a hand on a table feeling for footsteps. He'd started doing it after Jiraiya's network flagged 2 S-rank signatures moving down the river road. He felt them cross the border. He knew where they'd stop. He got there first. The clearing was maybe 40 meters across, ringed in old-growth pine, and the rain was coming down through it in sheets, when 2 men in black coats with red clouds walked out of the trees and found a 13-year-old sitting on a stump in the middle of it. Kasame Hoshigaki grinned. He had a lot of teeth for it. Just you? I thought I'd give you a head start, Naruto said. Kasame liked that. You could see him like it. Then he stopped liking it and started working, because whatever else he was, that man was a professional, and he came off the tree line with Samehada already swinging and the wrappings peeling back. Samehada bit down on the edge of the expanding room and found nothing. Here's why. Samehada eats chakra. It reads the nature transformation, latches onto the signature, and drinks. Fire, water, lightning, wind, earth. The sword had eaten all of them, and it had eaten tailed beast chakra, and it had never once in its long unpleasant life met a technique that had no nature in it at all. The spatial surgery art isn't a transformation, it's a statement about where things are. Samehada put its teeth into a rule and got confused. Shambles. The sword left Kasame's hands. It reappeared 200 meters back in the tree line, embedded in a pine, wrapping shredding, shrieking in a register that made the rain jump. And Kasame Hoshigaki, a man who had spent 30 years bonded to a weapon that was alive and hated everyone but him, turned and went after it on pure instinct, one full stride toward the tree line, inside the room. Naruto raised a finger. Tacked, 30 meters of old-growth forest came out of the ground. Not fell. Came out, root systems and all, 40 pines and the earth they were standing in, lifting off the floor of the clearing in a single hinged mass with soil pouring off the bottom of it, hanging in the rain for 1 full second like a hand held up over a table. Then it came down on him. The sound reached Konoha's walls. There's a log entry from the western gate that night, noting impact, southeast, estimated 3 kilometers, no smoke. And 2 Chunin were dispatched. And they never got there because it was over before they cleared the second checkpoint. The crater was 11 meters across. Kisame came out of it. That's the thing about him. The man was a monster in the technical sense. A body built to survive, things bodies don't survive. And he pushed 40 tons of tree and dirt off his back and stood up in the rain with half his face open and his teeth still showing. Naruto was already coming down on him with Kikoku wrapped in blue. Everyone has a price. Yours was your heartbeat. K-Room. The blade went through the plate of Kisame's shoulder armor, through the muscle wall under it, through everything, and left no more mark than a thin red line drawn with a ruler. Then Naruto set his palm against the entry point. Shock will. The discharge blew out through Kisame Hoshigaki's back and took a wedge out of the crater wall behind him. He was dead before his knees found the mud. There was no last line, no laugh, no monologue about what a fun fight it had been. The monster of the mist went face down in a hole in the land of fire in the rain and stayed there. And 200 meters away, Samahata made a sound like something small being stepped on and went still in the tree. Naruto flicked the water off Kikoku and turned around. Itachi hadn't moved. He was standing at the edge of the clearing exactly where he'd been standing when it started. Sharingan on, 3 tomoe each, hands loose at his sides. Rain running off the brim of the hat. He'd watched all of it. He'd watched it with the most complete visual analysis system in the shinobi world. And he had come away with the same thing. Neji Hyuga came away with in a stadium balcony a year earlier. An accurate recording of an event with no explanation attached. Naruto walked toward him and stopped 6 meters out. "You're not going to fight me," he said. "No," Itachi said. "Good. Sit down. I'm going to say something, and then you're going to leave." And here's where the story goes somewhere nobody expected, including Itachi Uchiha. Naruto told him. Not a threat, not a negotiation. He stood in a clearing in the rain with a dead swordsman behind him and laid the whole thing out in flat sentences, one after another. The coup, the clan's plan, the timeline, the meetings under the shrine. Danzo's ultimatum, the choice put to a 19-year-old Anbu captain between 400 bodies and 40,000. The night itself, the younger brother left standing in a corridor with a genjutsu already in his eyes. And then he told him the other part. Shisui went off the cliff at the Naka River, Naruto said. One eye already gone. He gave you the other one and told you to protect the village and the clan's name. He left a note in his own handwriting. Danzo had the first eye, and Danzo gave the order that put 9 men in Uzushio 4 years later. The Sharingan in Itachi's eyes did something. Faltered, maybe. Spun down half a step and caught itself. How? Itachi said. He carried me out of a hospital cell when I was 6 and kept me alive for a year, Naruto said. He died getting me a cure. When he did, I got everything he had. His face, his voice, the way he took a corner too fast, the song about the duck, all of it. It's in here with everything else. The rain filled about 4 seconds of empty space. Shisui was my mentor, Itachi said. His voice had gone somewhere thin. He was the one person who... I know who he was, Naruto said. He was mine too. I have thought about that moment a great deal. Itachi Uchiha had spent 5 years inside of grief. He was structurally forbidden from explaining to another living person, not allowed to tell his brother, not allowed to tell the village, not allowed to tell the organization he'd infiltrated. He had built a life out of being the only person who knew what he was carrying, and he had made peace with the idea that he would die that way, alone with it, hated by the one person he'd done it for. And a 13-year-old in a wet fur hat stood in a clearing and named the whole thing back to him, including the parts Itachi had never told anybody, including the small ones, the door frames, the ruined rice, the way Shisui said his name. Itachi Uchiha put a hand out and put it against a tree. He didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. The man had not been physically capable of that for a long time, but he put his hand on a tree because he needed one. And a man who had fought Orochimaru to a standstill needed a tree, and that tells you what had just happened to him. You should kill me, he said when he could. I've considered it, Naruto said. Shisui wouldn't have. That's the whole reason you're standing there, so don't waste it. He sheathed Kikoku. Sasuke's gonna find out, he said. Not from you. You'd tell it wrong. You'd make yourself the villain again because that's the only ending you've rehearsed. It'll come through channels that hold documents, testimony, corroboration, and something Shisui wrote for him the night before he took me over the wall. It'll take about 1.5 years to build, and it'll be airtight. He'll do whatever he does. That's his, not yours, and definitely not mine. Naruto adjusted the hat. Stop taking their missions. Itachi looked at him. They'll come for me. They'll come for you if you're useful or if you're a threat, Naruto said. Be neither. Go somewhere and be sick in peace. You've got maybe 2 years in those lungs, and you've spent every day of the last 5 paying a debt to people who are going to throw you in a ditch the second you stop being convenient. Danzo did that to Shisui. Don't hand them the same shovel. He turned and started for the tree line. Uzumaki. Naruto stopped. Why? Itachi said. You have every reason to end this here. Naruto didn't turn around. Because he'd have laughed at you, he said, and then he'd have made you soup badly and made you eat all of it. I can't do the first part. Consider the second part delivered. Then he was gone into the trees, and Itachi Uchiha stood alone in a clearing in the rain, with Kasame Hoshigaki dead in a crater behind him, and a truth he had carried alone for 5 years, suddenly, unbearably, shared. He stood there for a long time. 8 months later, a hawk came in from Suna, and the message on it was 4 words long, and the gate guards read it twice before they sent 3 separate runners to the tower. Gaara arrived 2 days after that. No siblings, no escort, no diplomatic party. He walked up to Konoha's north gate alone with a gourd on his back and asked in that flat voice whether Naruto Uzumaki was in the village. Kotetsu, who had by then developed a professional relationship with the strange and had stopped being surprised by most of it, said he'd check, and then went and got Tsunade instead, which was the correct call. The village watched Gaara of the desert walk down its main street. People moved out of his way. And I want to point out what they were moving away from, because it wasn't killing intent. There wasn't any. The thing that had come off that boy in the exams like heat off a stove had gone somewhere. The sand still turned in its slow loop, and the eyes were still the eyes. But the pressure was gone. They moved because they remembered. He found Naruto on the roof of a noodle place in the East District, sitting on the edge with his legs hanging off, eating something out of a bowl with his fingers because he'd forgotten to ask for chopsticks and hadn't considered it worth going back for. Gaara climbed up, sat down about a meter away, didn't say anything for a while. Then he did, and it visibly cost him. Nothing has happened in front of me since the exams that I understood, he said. Naruto kept eating. The invasion. The roof. I understood that. It was a stronger person doing a thing to a weaker person. I've seen that my whole life. Gaara's hands were flat on his knees. Then you sat down. You were going to put the sand up if I walked at you. Why does that matter to you? It doesn't, Naruto said. I just didn't feel like fighting someone who was confused. That landed somewhere in Gaara that had no receiving equipment for it. He sat with it for maybe half a minute. The sun was going down over the Hokage monument, and the noodle steam was coming up past both of them from the vents below. I've killed 211 people, Gaara said. I know. Your file's thorough. Does that change the answer? To what question? Gaara looked at his hands. Whether I get one, he said. A person who'd be worse off. Naruto finished the bowl and set it down on the tiles. You've got a sister who followed you to a stadium she thought was going to be your grave, he said. You've got a brother whose heart I held in my fist, and the first thing he did when he could walk was go and stand between you and a jonin who wanted you sedated. Neither of them likes you. They're both terrified of you. They both came anyway. He stood up and brushed the roof grid off. You're not starting from zero, Gaara. You've been given 2 and never opened them. Gaara sat very still. That's a bad way to say it, he said eventually. It's the only way I say things. They talked for another hour on that roof, and I don't have most of it, because neither of them ever repeated it, and the 2 of them were the only 2 people up there. What I do know is that the Suna-Konoha Treaty was drafted the following week and signed within the month, and that Gaara of the Desert went home and did a thing that shocked his entire village. He started showing up. Council meetings, border reports, the tedious, ugly infrastructure of a village that had been failing for a decade under a Kazekage who'd sold it to a snake. 3 years later, they made him Kazekage. And there are people in Suna who will tell you that the whole thing started on a noodle shop roof in a foreign country with 2 damaged kids and a bowl eaten with fingers. Then 2.5 years went past. I'll do this fast because it went fast. Tsunade Senju took Naruto's training personally and kept the promise she'd made in a broken street in Tanzaku quarters. She built the wing. She staffed it. She put him in it one day in 7, and then 2. And by the second year, he was doing procedures in that hospital that the medical corps of 4 other villages sent people to observe and could not replicate. Tumor extraction with no incision, nerve reattachment in patients who'd been paralyzed for a decade. A woman named Sane Tsukikage walked out of Konoha General on legs she hadn't used since the Third War, and she was the 11th person that year. He never charged anyone. Tsunade tried to build a fee structure into it once for the foreign patients, and he told her that the moment there was a price on that room, the room would start deciding who deserved to live based on their bank, and he'd burn it down himself before he let that happen. Tsunade dropped it. She also, I'm told, went to her office and sat with the door shut for a while. Jiraiya tried to train him. Lasted 3 days. On the 3rd afternoon, Naruto looked up from a ceiling array he was correcting and said, "You're better at information networks than at teaching. Be useful in the way you're actually useful." And Jiraiya opened his mouth to be offended and then closed it, because it was true and he'd known it was true since he was 30. He spent the next 2 years running the most aggressive intelligence operation of his career, feeding Atsuki movement data into a hand-drawn map in a Konoha basement, and it turned out to be the most valuable work he ever did. When people ask me what Jiraiya's greatest contribution to the shinobi world was, I tell them it was a map, and they think I'm joking. Shikamaru made Chunin and then made himself into something that didn't have a rank. He'd started with formations built around one absurd variable, and by the end of the 2nd year, he'd built an entire tactical doctrine around it. And the Konoha Strategic Office had adopted 11 of his frameworks and had no idea that all 11 of them assumed the presence of a specific person. Asuma read one of them and told his father it was the most frightening document he'd ever been handed by a 16-year-old. Asuma also, and I love this detail, kept the mission report from the Land of Frost in his desk. The 4th draft. He never told anybody why. Shoji got taller and wider and stronger and remained, throughout every year of this story, the only person alive who could hand Naruto Uzumaki a bag of chips and get a thanks. And Sasuke Uchiha stayed. He got the dossier in his 18th month post-Valley. Shikamaru built it, 140 pages, testimony transcripts, requisition record, Jiraiya's network pulled out of 3 archives, and a written account of the massacre's origin in Shisui Uchiha's own recollection as relayed by the only person alive carrying it. And at the bottom of the box, sealed, in handwriting, Sasuke recognized from the margins of his brother's training scrolls, a letter Shisui wrote the night before he went over Konoha's wall with a dying 6-year-old on his back. It was addressed to the Uchiha kid who's going to be angry. Shisui had written it not knowing which one it would be. Sasuke didn't speak for 2 days. Then he went to the training grounds and stayed there for 11 weeks. And when he came out, he was different in a way that was hard to name and easy to see. Still difficult, still Uchiha to the bone, still incapable of a compliment that didn't come out sideways. But he stayed, and staying meant something. And the village had an Uchiha who knew the truth and was carrying it around like a stone. He hadn't yet decided what to build with. The time skip ended on a report. An Akatsuki strike team hit a Land of Fire border village called Kaizen at the start of the 3rd summer. 211 people lived there. The team was after a sealed scroll a merchant had bought without knowing what it was. They left nothing standing. Not the people, not the buildings, not the animals. Naruto read the report at a table in the Hokage Tower. He read it twice, all the way through, including the appendix with the names. Then he set it down and went to find Shikamaru. "We're moving," he said. Shikamaru looked up from a map he'd been staring at for 3 days. "Where?" "Toward them." And that was the end of the waiting. Pain came for Konoha on the 7th of the 9th month, 2 years and 3 months after Kaizen, and he came for a reason no other enemy ever had. Every Akatsuki operation that had touched the Land of Fire in 4 years had failed. Kisame, gone. Itachi, withdrawn. 2 collection teams turned back, one of them missing a man. Nagato had run the analysis himself in a tower in Omegakure, and the variable that appeared in every failure was a name. He didn't come for the Nine-Tails, he came for the surgeon of Konoha, and he sent all 6 bodies to do it. because he'd concluded that anything less was an offering. The Deva path came down in the middle of Konoha's main street at 4 in the afternoon in front of maybe 300 people. It landed on its feet in the road and stood up and looked around at a village going about its business. And it said what it always says. The speech. Suffering as the only universal language. Peace through shared pain. The mathematics of a world that has to be shown what it does before it will stop doing it. God and what a God has to be willing to do. It's a good speech, honestly. Nagato meant every word. That's what makes him worth telling stories about. Naruto let him finish. That's the part people can't get over. There were Anbu on the rooftops with their hands on their weapons, and the alarm was already going, and civilians were running for the shelters, and Naruto Uzumaki stood in the middle of that street with his hands in his coat pockets and his hat pulled down and let a man deliver an entire speech about the nature of pain all the way to the last line without interrupting once. Then the Deva path stopped talking. You came to my operating room. That was your mistake. The room expanded. I need you to understand the size of this because everything I've described before now was practice. It came off him in a wave and it took the street and then the district and then it kept going. It went over the market and the academy and the hospital and the clan compounds. It went over the wall in every direction at once. It went up past the Hokage monument and closed over the top of it. And it went down into the sewers and the shelters and the foundations. And when it locked shut, it had swallowed the entire village of Konohagakure and about half a kilometer of forest in every direction. 61,000 people were inside that dome. So were 6 bodies. They'd all come in already. That was Nagato's plan. 6 simultaneous entry points, the assault opening from everywhere at once. Every one of them was inside the sphere before the sphere existed, and every one of them felt it close. And Nagato in his tower in Amamegakure felt it through 6 sets of eyes at the same instant and made a sound that Conan had never heard him make. The Naraka path was in the eastern district, with the King of Hell already coming up out of the ground behind it, hands out, reaching for a Chunin soul. Shambles. Its hands and its head changed places. I want you to picture that. The technique requires the hands. The head does the reaching and the hands do the taking, and a body with a head on its wrist stump and 2 hands sitting on its neck cannot do either. The King of Hell hung open behind it with nothing to receive, and the Chunin, a 19-year-old named Yori, who'd been on gate duty an hour earlier, sat down in the street and stayed sitting for a long time. Naruto walked past 3 streets over and lifted a finger without looking. Tact. A water tower came off a roof in the eastern district and dropped 40 feet onto the Naraka path, and the King of Hell went out like a light going off. The animal path summoned first. A multi-headed dog the size of a house came out of the smoke on the western approach, and it was the one that split when you hit it, and it was already splitting. Tact. The whole animal came off the ground. 14 tons of summoned beast, lifted, held, turning slowly 40 feet above a residential district with its legs cycling in empty air and every one of its heads screaming. Naruto leveled Kikoku. Puncture will. A lance of blue went out of the blade and through the summon lengthwise, nose to tail, straight through the middle of the thing and detonated at the far end. The dog came apart in the air and was smoke before the pieces hit anything, and the shockwave took the roof off an empty warehouse and nothing else, because Naruto had put the detonation point where he wanted it. The animal path started another summon. Naruto was behind it. There'd been no travel. There never was. Amputate. 6 pieces on the street. Then Kikoku again, straight down, through the piece with the eyes in it. The Preta path found him next, and it was confident, because the Preta path's entire function is to eat techniques, and it had eaten everything from every village and never once failed. It got its hands on the edge of the room and opened up and found the same thing Samahata found in a rainy clearing 2 years earlier. There's no nature to absorb. There's no flow to redirect. A room isn't chakra doing something to the world. It's chakra having already decided something about the world. And the Preta path stood in the middle of a street with its absorption barrier at full output, drinking nothing. Naruto put a hand on its chest. The blue cube formed around his fingers, and he pushed his hand in and closed it and pulled it back out. And the Pretapath's heart came out of its chest and kept beating in his palm for 2 full seconds while the body stood there. Then he closed his fist. The body dropped. There were maybe 40 civilians watching that from a shelter entrance. And one of them was a woman named Ayame, who worked in her father's noodle stand and had been serving that boy food since he was 8 years old. And she told me she watched the whole thing and never once thought about running, because it had already been made clear to everyone in that village who the street belonged to. The human path had a jonin by the head in the North District, hand on the forehead, soul coming up out of the man's face in a thread. Naruto was 400 meters away, in a different district, and did nothing more than lift 2 fingers. Shambles. The jonin was gone, swapped with a hitching post from a stable 11 blocks away, deposited on his back in the middle of a street with his soul snapping back into him hard enough to make him vomit, alive. The human path stood with its hand around a wooden post. Naruto arrived. He didn't use a technique. He drew Kikoku and took its head off with an ordinary sword swing, which he did, I think, because he had gotten bored. The Asura path was the loudest. It opened up on the Hokage Tower from 600 meters with every launcher it had. Missile arrays out of the shoulders, out of the chest cavity, out of the arms, 41 projectiles in the air at once, heading for a building with 180 people in it. Naruto stood on the roof of the academy and raised his hand. Tact. Every single one of them stopped. 41 missiles hanging in the air over Konoha, motionless, smoke trails still curling forward off the back of them and going nowhere. He turned his hand over. They reversed. All of them at once, at the exact velocity they'd arrived with, and the Asura path took its own bombardment in the chest at point-blank range, and the detonation took out an empty section of the eastern wall and 100 meters of tree line behind it, and nothing else, because the room decides where things go, which left the Deva path standing in the same street it had landed in. It hadn't moved. Nagato had spent the last 2 minutes watching 5 bodies stop reporting in, and he had made the correct assessment, which was that the only remaining play was the one he'd been saving. The Deva path lifted its hands. Shinra Tensei. The push came off it in a sphere. The technique that had, in the version of this story where things went the way Nagato planned, flattened Konoha into a crater. Everything in a 300-meter radius repelled at once. Buildings and roads and people. An absolute rejection of everything with mass. It hit the room, and the room hit back. Naruto had already moved. Shambles behind the repulsion front, standing in the pocket of stillness at the Deva path's back, before the technique finished expanding and the push went out in every direction and left one boy standing untouched in the center of it with his hand flat on the path's spine. He held the position. He let the technique run all the way out. The Deva path felt him there and could do absolutely nothing about it because its own attack was still executing, and there is no cancel on Shinra Tensei. 6 seconds. Nagato, in his tower, kilometers away, in a chair he could not leave, felt a hand on the back of a body he was wearing for 6 full seconds. "You've been in a room that belongs to me since you walked in," Naruto said. "I was just waiting to see what you'd do with the time." K-room. The blade went in under the left shoulder blade. Shock will. The Deva path came apart into the street, and the black rods scattered across the cobbles and lay there smoking, and the last of 6 bodies stopped being a thing that moved. The room stayed up. That's the detail everyone forgets. It stayed up for another 11 minutes while Naruto walked the village and confirmed every path was down, and inside those 11 minutes, he lifted 3 collapsed structures off people with a finger and swapped a burning stall's contents with a water cistern and set a Chunin's dislocated shoulder in the street without stopping. Civilian casualties from the assault on Konohagakure. 0. Structural damage, 4 buildings, 1 section of wall, and a warehouse roof. Tsunade Senju got the field report at the tower window while the dome was still overhead, and she read it standing up, and then she sat down on the edge of her own desk, which is a thing nobody had ever seen her do, and she read it again. 6, she said. 6, Hokage-sama. How long? Shizune checked the log. From the first landing to the last confirmed kill, 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Tsunade looked out the window at the blue closing over her village like the inside of an eyelid, and she said something under her breath that Shizune has always declined to repeat. Then Naruto traced the signal back, because that's what he'd been doing the whole time. 6 bodies driven by black rods, receiving from a single source, and every time a path moved, he'd been reading the direction of the flow the way you read the veins on the back of a hand. By the time the Deva path went down, he had a bearing and a distance, and he was moving before the dome faded. The tower was a paper construct on the northern edge of the village, folded out of a technique, and Conan let him in because there was no version of stopping him. Nagato was in the chair. I don't know how to describe what was in that chair without making it sound worse than it was, and it was already the worst thing I've ever been told about. A body that had been feeding 6 others for years. Legs that had stopped being legs. Black rods through the spine and out the shoulders. And a face with the Rinnegan in it that had not seen a room from a standing position since he was a teenager. He was dying. The complete failure of all 6 paths had pulled everything out of him at once, and there was nothing left in the tank to reroute. Naruto pulled a chair over and sat down across from him. He didn't draw. He didn't threaten. He sat down in front of a dying man in a paper tower, and he put his hat in his lap, and Conan stood by the wall with her hands full of paper and did nothing, because she had also concluded that there was no version of stopping him. "You're a doctor," Nagato said. His voice was almost nothing. "That's in your file." "It is. Then you know what's wrong with me." "Everything," Naruto said. "In order of severity, your renal function's gone, your spine's a lattice, and you've been running a chakra network at 9 times its designed load for 11 years. If I opened you up tonight, I'd close you again." Nagato almost smiled. "They told me you'd be like this." Then he talked, and I'm going to give this to him, because he earned it. Nagato explained himself fully and honestly to the person who just destroyed the entire architecture of his life. Amegakure. The war fought in his country by 3 other countries. Yahiko. Conan. The bodies in the mud. The specific realization at 17 that the world only ever responds to a cost, and that the only honest thing left to do was make the cost so large that nobody could afford another war. He believed it. That's the thing that makes him worth this many words. He wasn't lying to himself. Naruto listened. All the way through. Then Nagato asked the question he'd actually been waiting to ask. "You were a Jinchuriki in a village that hated you," he said. "You were left to die in a hospital cell. I've read the file. You had every reason to become exactly what I became." His hands on the arms of the chair moved about an inch. "Why didn't you?" Naruto turned the hat over in his lap. "Because someone sat down next to me on a cold floor," he said, "and then someone killed him for it, and I decided that neither of them would be wasted." Nagato was silent. "You had Yahiko," Naruto said. "You had Conan. Same as me, roughly. The 3 of us all got handed the same lesson by the same kind of people, and you built a religion out of the pain, and I built a practice out of the man. That's the whole difference, and it isn't philosophy." He put the hat back on. "The difference between us is simple. I stopped asking permission." "From whom?" "Everyone. You spent 11 years waiting for the world to acknowledge your suffering before you let it stop. That's a permission structure. You built a god because you needed someone to approve the bill." Naruto stood up. "I didn't ask the village if I could live. I didn't ask the council if I could operate. I didn't ask anyone whether 9 dead root operatives in Uzushio was justice. It was done, and then it was done." Nagato's breathing had gone shallow and irregular over the last minute show. Conan had come off the wall 2 steps. "You could end it," Nagato said. "I could." "Are you going to?" Naruto looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said, and he didn't. He stood in that tower and watched a man die of his own life, and he could have stopped it, and he could have hastened it, and he chose neither. And I've never been able to decide what to call that. It's the coldest thing in this story, and it's also, if you look at it from a specific angle, the only mercy that particular man would have accepted. Nagato of Amagakure died in a chair in a paper tower, and the rods came out of him as the technique holding them failed, and Conan caught his shoulder as he went sideways. She stayed like that. Then she looked up. "Are you going to?" she asked. "Are you going to give me a reason?" She wasn't. She stood up with her friend's body against her shoulder, and she looked at the boy who had emptied her entire life in 11 minutes, and she said absolutely nothing at all. Naruto left. Conan went home to Amegakure and became something the Rain Country hadn't had in 40 years, which was a leader who wasn't at war with anybody. She never joined the alliance, and she never opposed it. When the war came, Aim's borders were closed and everyone who ran to them was let in. She and Naruto met exactly once more, years later, and neither of them said a word about that tower. Itachi Uchiha found his brother in the spring. He'd done what he was told. 2 years of no missions, no organization, no contact. A sick man in rented rooms in 3 different countries, coughing into cloth, getting his affairs in the kind of order that a man gets them into when he's read his own chart. He'd let Akatsuki write him off. Nobody came looking, because a man with 2 years of lung left isn't worth the trip. He came back into the Land of Fire in the 3rd month with a plan that had exactly 1 item on it. Sasuke already knew. That's what made it different. The dossier had landed 18 months earlier, and Sasaki Uchiha had spent every day since carrying the fact of it. And when a man in a black coat came out of the trees on a ridge above the Naka River, Sasuke was already standing there with his sword drawn and his face doing something complicated. They fought anyway. Of course they fought. What else were the two of them going to do? Talk? It lasted about 20 minutes, and it was, by all accounts, the most beautiful and unpleasant thing anybody who saw it ever saw. Amaterasu on the ridge, Chidori through a lightning field. 2 Susanoo coming up out of 2 brothers who had spent 11 years pointed at each other. Sasuke fought like a man who was angry at everything except the person in front of him, and Itachi fought like a man on a schedule. At the end of it, Itachi was on his knees in the dirt with blood coming out of him from about 4 places, and none of it from a wound Sasuke had made. The disease got him. It had always been going to. He got his hand up. Everyone who tells this story says the same thing, that Sasuke flinched, and that the flinch was the last time he ever flinched at his brother. Itachi put 2 fingers against his forehead. "Sorry, Sasuke," he said. "This is it." And that was the end of Itachi Uchiha at 24, on a ridge over the river his clan was named for. Naruto was there, not in it. On the far bank, 200 meters out, sitting on a rock with Kokoku across his knees and his hands in his pockets and his hat down, and he had been there for the whole thing and had done absolutely nothing. He came over after. Sasuke was sitting in the dirt with his brother's body about a meter away, and he wasn't crying, and he wasn't screaming, and he had the specific blank look of a man whose entire internal architecture has just been asked to load a completely different set of years. Naruto stood next to him, both of them looking at the same thing. "He was 21 when they gave him that mission," Naruto said. 3 years older than you are now." Sasuke said nothing. "You should know that he was scared of it," Naruto said. "Shisui's memories. He was terrified. He did it anyway. Make of that what you want." He turned and walked away up the bank. Sasuke stayed on that ridge until it got dark, and then he stayed until it got light again. When he came back into the village, he went to Tsunade's office without being summoned and asked for the paperwork to have the Uchiha compound reopened. And Tsunade asked him what for, and he said he was going to live in it. That's it. That's the whole first step. He didn't make a speech, and he didn't announce a change, and he was, for years afterward, exactly as unpleasant to be around as he'd always been. But he moved back into the compound, and he cleaned it himself. And about 6 months in, someone noticed that he'd repaired the shrine. The war started 14 months later. I'm going to move fast through the scaffolding because you know the shape of it, and it's the specific interventions that matter. A masked man calling himself Madara Uchiha declared the 4th Great Ninja War at the 5 Kage Summit. The Akatsuki's remnants had folded into something larger, an army of the resurrected, tens of thousands of white bodies grown out of a tree in a cave, and a plan involving the moon that had been in motion since before most of the people in that room were born. The alliance formed in 9 days, 5 villages, 80,000 shinobi under one command structure for the first time in the history of the world. Gaara gave the speech that made it hold. Kazekage at 20, standing on a crate in front of an army that had spent 4 generations killing each other, and what he said was short and it worked. And in the joint command tent, the 4th Raikage looked across a map table at a Konoha Jonin in a fur hat and said that all field assets would operate under unified command, and that included special designation personnel. Naruto looked at him. 4 seconds. He didn't say a word. Then he looked back down at the map. The 4th Raikage, a man who once arm wrestled a bull, opened his mouth and then closed it and moved on to logistics. And afterward, outside the tent, Darui asked him about it, and A said, "I fought a Jinchuriki. I fought 2. That's not a Jinchuriki thing." And then he wouldn't discuss it further. The 2nd Division broke on the 4th day. Resurrected shinobi, the Edo Tensei Corps, 11 of them, including 3 former Kage and 2 of the 7 swordsmen, hit the 2nd Division's line at the Eastern Basin and folded it in 90 minutes. You cannot kill the dead. That's the entire horror of that technique. You take a man apart and he stands back up with his arms reassembling on the way. Kitsuchi's forces held for as long as they could. The line was 200 meters from collapsing when the runner reached the command ridge. Naruto arrived at the Eastern Basin alone. He walked out to the edge of the ridge, above a battlefield, 7 kilometers wide, with 11,000 Alliance soldiers in the middle of losing it. And he put both hands down at his sides, and he stopped restraining himself. Here's what the Nine Tails and Naruto Uzumaki had worked out over 11 years. And I want to be clear that it was worked out, negotiated, agreed. There was no forcing on either side of that arrangement. The Ope Ope Matrix ate Biju Chakra as fuel. The fox had been feeding it since the crate in Uzushio. And somewhere in the 2nd year of the time skip, the 2 of them figured out that if the fox pushed hard enough and Naruto shaped it right, the spatial field could be fed from a reservoir that had no bottom. Gold came up out of him. It came up his arms in threads first, then in ropes, then in a full cloak that burned off him like a coat made out of a sunset. And the black seal patterning came up over it. And the blue of the expanding room went through it and came out the other side, a color that has no name in any language I speak. Full room. It went out, past the ridge, past the front line, past the artillery positions and the field hospital and the flanking squads and the tree line. And it did not stop when it reached the far edge of the battlefield. It kept going, and when it finally locked, there were 7 square kilometers of active warfront inside a dome of gold-shot blue, with a boy in a fur hat standing at the center of it. 11,000 Alliance soldiers looked up at the same time. Every resurrected shinobi on that field stopped moving, because whatever's left of a person in an Edo Tensei body still has instincts, and every instinct any of them had ever developed went off at once. Naruto raised one hand. Shambles. Every dead thing on that field changed places with the air 40 meters above it. 11 S-rank shinobi and about 400 white zetsu, all of them suddenly at altitude with nothing under them. The ones who could fly caught themselves. The ones who couldn't came down. And the sound of 400 bodies hitting a battlefield from 40 meters is a thing I have been told about by 3 separate people who were there, and none of them could finish describing it. The 2nd Division stopped retreating. Then Naruto walked out onto the field. He didn't hurry. He walked out into 7 square kilometers of his own domain with Kikoku over his shoulder, and he took the 11 of them apart one at a time. The 2nd Mizukage got up, and Naruto used amputate and put him in 11 sections, and the sections crawled and reattached, and Naruto used amputate again on the reassembled pieces, and again on those. And after the 4th iteration, the thing driving that body understood the situation and stopped trying. The 3rd Raikage, who had a body no technique in history had penetrated, who had fought a tailed beast for 3 days, took a K-room pass through the chest and a shock willy from the inside, and came apart into pieces small enough that the ceiling corp collected them with a shovel. 2 of the 7 swordsmen went at him together, and he stood still and used shambles once, and their weapons ended up in each other, which is a thing I still think about. By the time the sealing teams got out onto the field to finish the job, because you seal Edo Tensei, you don't kill it. The 2nd Division's front had advanced 800 meters, and there wasn't an enemy standing inside the dome. Total time, 19 minutes. Show me the reactions? Here's the reactions. A censor from Kumo named Atsui tried to file a range report and wrote the number down 3 times and crossed it out 3 times because there was no field on the form that went that high. A Konoha Chunin named Udon sat down in the dirt and cried, which I mentioned because nobody made fun of him for it. Kitsuchi of Iwa, division commander, walked up to Naruto afterward and stood there with his hands at his sides and said, "My father fought your father." And Naruto said, "I know." And Kitsuchi said, "He said the yellow flash was the fastest thing he ever saw." And Naruto said nothing at all, and Kitsuchi nodded once and walked away. And Shikamaru Nara, on the command ridge 4 kilometers back, watched a gold dome cover 1/7 of the front and said to nobody in particular, "There's no ceiling. I've been looking for it for 11 years and there isn't one." Madara Uchiha came down on the 6th day, the real one, resurrected at full power and then released from the contract, walking around in the world in a body that had all of its original faculties and none of its original limits, with the Rinnegan in his face and a gunbai on his back, and 60 years of being the most feared man in history sitting behind his eyes. He hit the Alliance's central front and killed 400 people in 11 minutes. Then he stopped because the sky changed color. Naruto came onto that field with the gold already up. "I'm going to give you this fight properly because it's the one people ask about." Madara looked at him. Long look from about 80 meters across a field full of the dead. "Ah," Madara said, "you're the one they're all frightened of." Naruto drew Kikoku. "Very well." Madara raised a hand. "Meteorites. If you've never seen a Tengai Shinsei, and you haven't, here's what it is. A man reaches up through the atmosphere and pulls something down out of it. 2 of them came through the cloud layer at the same time, each one large enough to erase a village, trailing fire across half the sky, and they came down on the Alliance's central position with the entire 4th Division underneath. 20,000 people looked up. Naruto lifted one finger. Tact. Both meteorites stopped 400 meters above the ground. They hung there, burning, turning, casting shadows across 20,000 people who had been about to die and now weren't. And Madara Uchiha, who had fought Hashirama Senju to a standstill, who had lived through the founding of every village on the continent, who had literally never in his entire existence had a technique of that scale beheld, went completely still. Naruto turned his hand over. The meteorites went back up. Not thrown, lifted at speed, back up through the clouds they'd come down through, and then out. Shambles, both of them at once, swapped with 2 equivalent volumes of empty air somewhere over open ocean 400 kilometers east. Where they hit the water and made a wave that nobody was standing in, the sky went clear. Madara's Susanoo came up, the full one. The complete body. 100 meters of blue armor with 4 arms and 4 swords and a face like a mask carved by someone who hated you. And it came up out of the ground with a sound like a mountain being installed. And every shinobi in a 2-kilometer radius went flat on instinct. Naruto walked toward it. The first sword came down and he wasn't there. Shambles, up, standing on the Susanoo's own forearm. And the second sword came around and he wasn't there either. He ran up the arm. Kikoku went blue and then went bright. K-Room. He drove the blade into the Susanoo's shoulder joint. Now, the thing about a Susanoo is that it's not armor. It's a construct of chakra given the shape of armor. And every technique in history that had ever tried to break one had tried to break it from the outside, and Madara's had never broken. Naruto didn't hit the armor. He put the spatial field into the structure holding the armor together on the inside, where the chakra lattice folds into itself. He set his palm flat against the shoulder. Shock will. The complete body. Susanoo came apart from the inside out. 100 meters of construct blew outward in every direction in a shell of blue fragments that came down across 4 square kilometers of battlefield like a glass roof falling, and the pressure wave knocked over 2,000 people and flattened a forest. and Madara Uchiha fell 40 meters and landed on his feet in the crater of his own armor. He was at that moment genuinely surprised, and I want to note the historical significance of that. There is no record of Madara Uchiha being surprised, not by Hashirama, not by dying, not by coming back. 60+ years of consciousness across 2 eras, and a boy in a spotted hat put an expression on his face that had never been there. Then he used limbo. This is his best technique, and almost nobody has ever known about it. Invisible bodies, versions of himself standing in a layer of space adjacent to this one, unseeable by anything including the Sharingan, able to act on the physical world while being untouchable by it. He'd killed people for months with it, and they died thinking they'd tripped. 4 of them came at Naruto from 4 sides, and the room reached in and picked them up. Because that's the whole thing, isn't it? The room isn't a technique that affects the visible layer. It's a claim on geometry, and geometry doesn't care which layer you're hiding in. Shambles. All 4 limbo clones changed places with 4 boulders from the crater wall and found themselves stacked in the same cubic meter of space. And whatever happens to a limbo body when it's compressed into another limbo body is not something the technique's documentation covers. Madara staggered. Actually staggered on the physical layer because he'd felt all 4 of them go. What is this technique? Naruto had already lifted Kikoku. Scalpels don't hesitate. Puncture will. The lance came off the blade with gold burning through the blue, and it crossed the crater in a fraction of a second and went through Madara Uchiha's chest and out his back and kept going for another 200 meters before it detonated, and it took a hillside with it. He was still standing. Of course he was still standing. He was Madara. Puncture will. The second one went through his sternum. Then Naruto was in front of him, inside the wreckage of the Susanoo, close enough to smell the burning. With Kikoku wrapped in a field so dense the air around it was bending, Madara looked down at him. There was blood in his mouth. He was trying to form a hand seal with fingers that were only partly reporting in. "You," he said, "should have been born in K-room." The blade went through him from the front, up under the ribs and out the back of the shoulder, and Naruto put his free hand flat against the entry point. Shock will. There was nothing left above the waist, and here's the thing that made the entire Alliance army lose its mind. He didn't come back. Edo Tensei rebuilds. That's the point. You take the body apart and the ash reassembles and the thing stands up. Everyone on that field had watched it happen 100 times in 6 days. Madara Uchiha's remains sat on the ground and did nothing at all. Because shock will, it doesn't destroy a body. It destroys the space the body was occupying. And there is no reassembly protocol for that. 20,000 people watched the most dangerous man in the history of the shinobi world fail to get up. The sound that army made, I've had it described to me by 6 people, and none of them called it a cheer. Gaara arrived at the crater 4 minutes later with sand still hanging off his shoulders from his own front, and found Naruto standing at the bottom of it with Kikoku at his side and steam coming off the gold cloak. And Gaara looked at the remains and then at Naruto and said, "Was that him?" It was. Gaara looked at it for a while. 15 minutes, he said. 12. The whole army was going to die. They were, Naruto said, and started walking back up the crater wall. Total combat engagement between the 2 of them, from the meteorites to the last shock will. 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Then Toby ran and released the 10 tails, because that had always been the actual plan. The masked man had never expected Madara to be the finish. He'd expected Madara to be the distraction, and when Madara stopped being anything at all, the masked man moved his schedule up by 6 hours and pulled the beast out of the ground under the central battlefield. I'm going to keep this part short because it happened fast and because the details are mostly people running. The 10 tails came up out of the earth like something being born through the wrong opening. 80 meters at the shoulder. 1 eye. No mind behind it at all. That's the part people get wrong when they describe it. It wasn't malevolent. It was a process. It hit the Alliance's reserve position with a tail sweep and killed 1,200 people in one motion without noticing. The moon started moving in the sky. You could see it happening. Everyone on that field looked up at some point in the next 4 minutes and saw the moon in the wrong place and understood that a clock had started. Naruto walked out to meet it alone, and this time nobody tried to come with him. He stopped about 600 meters out, and both hands went down and the gold came up, everything he had. The fox emptied itself. The cloak went past Cloak and became something more like a shape standing behind him, and the spatial field came off him already at full extension, and the sound of it starting was heard 40 kilometers away in 3 directions. Full room. 7 square kilometers of gold-red dome landed on the 10 tails position. The beast was inside it. And then Naruto Uzumaki did something that has no name, because he invented it standing in the middle of a war with 100,000 people watching. He walked into the domain and started operating. Not amputate. Amputate separates. This was something under that. He put both hands out and he reached into the beast's chakra network the way he'd reached into 1,000 patients over 11 years, and he found the seams, because that's what the 10 tails is, underneath. It isn't one thing. It's 9 things held in a shell by a technique, and every one of them has an edge. And a man who has spent his entire life finding the boundary between 2 tissues that don't want to be separated can find an edge in anything. He started pulling them out. The one tail came first, because Naruto knew that signature better than any of the others, and went for what he could identify. Shukaku came out of the 10 tails side in a spray of sand and hit the ground 400 meters away, and stood up in the middle of the Alliance's left flank, confused and roared at nothing. Then Matatabi, then Isobu. Each extraction took the beast down a size. Each one came out of the hole with a sound like a hull tearing. The 10 tails, which had no mind, began to have something adjacent to one, and what it had was panic. It threw everything it had at the center of the domain. Tailed beast bombs, 4 of them, formed and fired in 11 seconds, each one capable of removing a mountain range. Tak caught all 4. He didn't send them back. He put them in the beast's own open mouth and let it close. By the 7th extraction, the 10 tails was half its original height and coming apart at the joins. And Naruto walked in under its own shadow and put his hands on the shell and pulled the 8 tails out through a hole he made by deciding there was one. Yuki hit the ground next to Killer B, who had been trying to get onto that field for 6 minutes and had been physically restrained by 4 people. And B stood there looking up at a beast he'd shared a body with for 30 years and said absolutely nothing, which for him was unprecedented. The 10 tails collapsed because there wasn't enough of it left to hold a shape. The moon stopped moving. Toby was standing on what was left of its skull when the dust came down, and he had no mask anymore because Naruto had taken it with a shambles at some point during the extraction, and neither of them had commented on it. Obito Uchiha, half his face a lattice of white grafting, the other half a 29-year-old man who had died at 13 and had been operating a machine of suffering ever since. He had no weapon. He had no plan. The thing he'd built his life around was lying in pieces across 4 kilometers of ground, and the moon was back where it belonged, and every tailed beast in the world was standing on that battlefield in the open air for the first time in a century. Naruto walked up onto the skull. He didn't draw. He stood about 5 meters away with the gold burning off him and the room still humming across 7 square kilometers, and he looked at Obito Uchiha for a long time. Then he asked him one question. Was it worth it? Obito opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again, and I'm told by Kakashi Hatake, who was standing at the base of that skull and who had spent 16 years thinking his friend died under a rock, that what happened to Obito's face in the next few seconds was worse than any technique anybody used on that field. Naruto waited about 10 seconds. Then he turned around and walked back down the slope, because he had asked his question and gotten his answer, and there was nothing in it for him. What happened to Obito Uchiha after that isn't mine to tell, and it isn't Naruto's either. Kakashi went up that slope. The 2 of them were up there for a long time. Obito died 3 days later in a field hospital of injuries the medics could have treated if he'd let them. And there's a marker for him on the memorial stone in Konoha with a date that's 16 years wrong on purpose. The war ended on the 8th day, Not with a cataclysm, not with the moon's eye. It ended because the surgeon got to the table before the patient flatlined, and because there was nothing left of the plan or the army or the man who built both. I'm going to tell you the true cost now, because a story that skips it is a story that lied to you. 41,000 people died in that war. That's Alliance dead confirmed over 8 days. Kiri lost the most as a proportion. Iwa lost the most in raw numbers. There were 411 Konoha shinobi in the ground when it was over, and every one of them had a name that somebody in that village said out loud at the memorial. Asuma Sarutobi lived. He took a spear through the abdomen on day 5, and he lived because a field medic got him into a tent, and a man in a fur hat walked into that tent 9 minutes later, put a room over it, and had him closed and stable in 4 minutes without opening him at all. Asuma woke up on day 6 with Kurenai holding his hand and a scar you'd need a magnifying glass to find. He asked, later, whether he'd been a priority case. "You were a 9-minute walk," Naruto said. "That's the only qualification the tent uses," which was a lie, and everybody in that tent knew it was a lie. And Asuma didn't push it. Neji Hyuga died on day 4 holding a corridor. Shikamaru's father died on day 2. The third Hokage, who'd insisted on the field at 71 and had been argued with by 5 separate people including his own son, died on day 7 with his hand still up. And Naruto reached that position 11 minutes too late and stood there for a while and then went back to work. That's the honest ledger. It wasn't a clean war. There has never been one. But the moon is where it's always been. And there are people walking around in 5 countries who were on that field, and the reason for both of those things has a name. 4 months after the war, they reconvened the Kaji Summit in the Land of Iron, and there was a chair at that table that hadn't existed the last time they met. Gaara proposed it. Tsunade seconded it. The Raikage argued for 2 hours and then voted for it. Kurotsuchi of Iwa, newly appointed, voted for it before her own delegation had finished sitting down. Chojuro of Kiri asked one question: does he want it? Which was the only intelligent question anybody asked that day. The position had no rank. It had no office and no title in any registry and no village. What it had was a mandate, authority to intervene anywhere on the continent where the cost of doing nothing was higher than the cost of acting, answerable to no village's chain of command, with the standing expectation that whoever held it would be the single most dangerous individual operating in the world, and would use that fact to make the alternative to peace too expensive to attempt. They wrote it in 4 pages. Shikamaru Nara drafted 3 of them, then they put it to him. Naruto Uzumaki read all 4 pages at that table with 5 Kage watching him do it, and he took his time about it, and when he set the last one down, he was quiet for a moment. "That's just do what I was already doing with paperwork," he said. "Yes," Tsunade said, "we're aware." He took it. He never became Hokage. That was never the shape that fit. A Hokage sits in a tower and signs things and holds a village together with policy. And Naruto has never in his life stayed in one place long enough to develop an opinion about zoning. Kakashi took the hat when Tsunade stepped down, and did it well, and complained about it constantly. The signing was in a room in the Land of Iron with about 40 people in it. Asuma watched from the back wall with his arms crossed and a cigarette he didn't light because Kurenai was standing next to him, and he had an expression on his face that he would never have described to anyone if you'd paid him. He'd taken a Genin team 11 years earlier and put a 12-year-old on the ground on the first day, in his own head. Before the kid moved a muscle, Shikamaru filed the structural paperwork himself because he'd written it and because he'd been planning for this exact outcome since a rooftop in Konoha 2 years earlier when he told Choji the world would come looking. He handed the last form to the Land of Iron's clerk with the expression of a man watching a plan land on schedule. Choji was at a table near the door with a plate, at peace, and had been for some time. Sasuke didn't come. He sent a note. The whole note said, "Don't get shot." Ino read it over Shikamaru's shoulder and said, "That's the nicest thing that man has ever written." And she was right. And everyone in that room who knew Sasuke Uchiha understood exactly how much of a letter that was. Gaara found him afterward outside on a balcony over a courtyard full of snow. You know they're all terrified of you, Gaara said. I know. Does that bother you? Naruto was quiet for a moment. Shisui wasn't terrified of me, he said. He walked into door frames on purpose and ate soup he couldn't keep down and called it worth it. That's the one that counts. The rest of them can decide what they want to feel. Gaara stood next to him and looked at the snow. Mine's Tamari, he said after a while. And Kankuro. It took about 4 years. That's fast. You said 40. I overestimate, Naruto said. It's a habit. Here's the rest of it. And then I'm done. He worked for another 41 years. He put down a coup in Kiri in 3 hours. He stopped a border war between Iwa and Kusa by standing in the middle of the disputed valley for 2 days until both armies went home, and he never drew the sword, and neither of those countries has fired on the other since. He hunted the last 4 Akatsuki remnants across 2 continents, and none of them are in a cell anywhere. And 1 day in 7, every single week, for 41 years, with 3 exceptions, all of which were wars. He was in a hospital. Konoha General's spatial wing performed 11,000 procedures under his hands. He trained 42 people in what could be trained and told all of them the same thing on their first day, which was that the moment they charged someone for a life, he'd close the room himself. He never finished the perennial youth operation. He worked on it for 30 years. Tsunade helped for 11 of them. In the end, he burned the notes, and when Shikamaru asked him why, he said, "It works. That's the problem. If it exists, somebody will make me use it on the wrong person, and then it'll be a market." He put the last page in the fire. Some doors you build so you know where they are, and then you brick them up. Shikamaru said troublesome, and let it go. He got old. That surprised a lot of people. There'd been an assumption in about 4 countries that a man like that would go out in something loud. He went out in a bed, at 79, in a house on the eastern side of Konoha, with Sasuke Uchiha sitting in a chair by the window because Sasuke had outlived almost everybody and had gotten into the habit of showing up. The last thing Naruto Uzumaki said out loud, according to the only person in the room, was a complaint about the temperature. They buried him with Kikoku because nobody else could lift the thing anyway. The hat's in a case in the Konoha archive, 3rd floor, in a room that gets a fair amount of foot traffic. There's a card next to it with a name and 2 dates and a single line underneath. And the line was written by Shikamaru Nara at 81 with a hand that shook, and it reads, "He never once asked." But that's not the image I want to leave you with. Here's the one. 3 floors under Konoha's hospital, past 2 locked doors, there's a room the village used to keep for the cases they'd given up on. Cold stone floor, 1 lamp, a drain in the corner. It hasn't been used for that in over 50 years. It's a supply closet now. Bandages, mostly. There's a shelf where the lamp was, and on the wall by the door, at about the height of a man sitting on the floor with his back against it and his legs stretched out like he's at a beach, somebody scratched something into the stone a very long time ago with the tip of a kunai. It's small. The staff who work that floor have all seen it, and none of them know what it means. And it's never been recorded in any inventory, and nobody has ever painted over it. It says, "The hallway light still doesn't work." I'm going to be so annoying about that. The light works now. It's been working since a Thursday in autumn about 50 years ago, when a man in a fur hat came down 3 flights of stairs at 2 in the morning, changed the bulb himself, and left without telling anybody.
That's the full story. One of the coldest, cleanest power fantasies you'll ever hear. Thanks for watching all the way through. If you enjoyed it, hit subscribe for more complete what-if stories like this. See you in the next one.